When Eliza Hartwell stepped off that train in Nevada, she expected a new beginning. Instead, she found rejection, hunger, and the bitter cold of a man's cruelty. Left to die on a station bench, she had given up, until 5 words pierced through her despair. "Can you read me a story?" What happens next will break your heart and put it back together again. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The wind cut through Eliza Hartwell's threadbare coat like 1,000 tiny knives, each gust reminding her that she was still alive when part of her wished she wasn't. She sat motionless on the wooden bench outside the Silver Creek station, her hands folded in her lap, fingers blue beneath the thin cotton of her gloves. Gloves that had once been white, now gray with travel and grief. The train was gone. The man who was supposed to be her husband was gone. Hope, she thought, was probably gone too. Eliza stared at the empty tracks stretching into the white void of Nevada winter, trying to remember exactly when everything had fallen apart. Was it the moment Henry Barlow saw her step down from the passenger car, her dress wrinkled from 3 days of travel, her eyes hollow from 3 months of mourning? Was it when he looked her up and down with the calculating gaze of a man inspecting livestock at market? Or was it when he leaned close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath and said, "You're not what I ordered. You look like death walking, and I don't need that kind of bad luck on my land." She'd tried to speak, to explain that yes, she'd been ill with grief after her family died in the fire, that yes, she was thinner than the photograph she'd sent 6 months ago, but she was strong, she was willing, she would work hard. But Henry Barlow had already turned his back. "Stage leaves in 2 hours," he'd said over his shoulder. "Be on it." That was 4 hours ago. The stage had come and gone. Eliza hadn't boarded it. Where would she go? Back to Pennsylvania? To the ashes of her childhood home? To the unmarked graves of her parents and younger brother? To the nothing that waited for her there? So she'd stayed on the bench as the afternoon faded into evening, as the temperature dropped and the snow began to fall in earnest, as the station master locked the office door and hurried away without meeting her eyes. She'd stayed because moving required deciding what to do next, and she had no decisions left in her. The cold was almost comforting now. She'd stopped shivering about an hour ago, which she dimly recognized as a bad sign, but bad signs didn't matter much anymore. Her stomach had stopped hurting too, though she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, a hard biscuit and weak coffee somewhere in Wyoming. The money she'd saved for this journey was nearly gone, spent on train fare and the small carpet bag that now sat at her feet, containing everything she owned in the world: 2 dresses, a nightgown, a hairbrush, 3 books, and a daguerreotype of her family taken the summer before they died. They'd been so happy that day. Her father, with his hand on her mother's shoulder, both of them trying not to smile so the photograph wouldn't blur. Thomas, only 12, unable to contain his grin entirely. And Eliza herself, 19 and full of dreams about teaching school, or maybe opening a bookshop one day. That girl seemed like a stranger now. The fire had taken them in October. A knocked-over lantern in the barn, her father going back inside to save the horses, her mother running after him, Thomas following his parents because that's what children do. They follow the people they love, even into flames. Eliza had been in town that day, delivering pies to the church social. She'd returned to find nothing but smoke and ruins and 3 bodies laid out in the yard beneath borrowed sheets. After that, there had been the blank weeks of grief, the neighbors' pitying looks, the well-meaning widow who suggested Eliza might find a fresh start out west as a mail-order bride. "You're a pretty girl still," Mrs. Henderson had said, as if prettiness mattered when you felt dead inside. "Smart, too. Some good man will be lucky to have you." So Eliza had written to the matrimonial agency, had corresponded with Henry Barlow through careful, polite letters that revealed nothing of her devastation. She'd sold what little remained, had boarded the train west with the desperate hope that perhaps in a new place, with a new purpose, she might find a reason to feel alive again. Instead, she'd found this: a frozen bench, an empty platform, and the growing certainty that she'd made a terrible mistake in not following her family into the fire when she'd had the chance. "I'm sorry," she thought, unsure whether she was apologizing to her dead family for surviving them or to herself for trying to go on living. "I'm so sorry I wasn't enough." The snow fell harder now, beginning to accumulate on her shoulders, her lap, the carpet bag at her feet. In the distance, lights glowed from the buildings of Silver Creek, a mining town clinging to the Nevada mountains. Population maybe 300 if you counted generously. There would be a boarding house there, probably, a saloon, a general store, places where a woman alone might find help. But Eliza couldn't make herself stand. Her legs wouldn't obey the command, and besides, what would she say? "Excuse me, I'm a mail-order bride who got rejected. Could you spare some charity?" The humiliation of it was worse than the cold. She closed her eyes. The darkness behind her lids was welcoming, soft. Maybe if she just rested here a little longer. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was small, high-pitched, definitely female, definitely young. Eliza forced her eyes open. Standing in front of her, knee-deep in the accumulating snow, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, with the dark brown hair escaping from beneath a knitted cap and wide gray eyes that studied Eliza with unsettling intensity. The child wore a wool coat that looked slightly too large for her, and mittens connected by a string threaded through the sleeves. "Yes?" Eliza's voice came out as a croak. She couldn't remember the last time she'd spoken aloud. "Are you waiting for someone?" the girl asked. Her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. "No." The admission hurt more than it should. "No, I'm not waiting for anyone." The child tilted her head, considering this. "Then why are you sitting in the snow?" It was such a reasonable question that Eliza almost laughed. Why was she sitting in the snow? Because moving seemed impossible. Because she had nowhere to go. Because sometimes giving up is easier than going on. "I suppose I'm just resting," Eliza said finally. "You look cold." "I am cold." "You should come inside. Papa says people can freeze to death if they stay outside too long when it's snowing." "Your papa is right." Eliza looked past the girl, searching for an adult who must be frantically looking for their child. But the platform was empty, the street beyond deserted. "Where is your papa, sweetheart?" "At the ranch. I came with Mr. Thompson to get supplies. He's in the store." The girl pointed vaguely toward the cluster of buildings. "But he talks forever when he sees people, so I got bored and went exploring." She said this matter-of-factly, as if wandering away from one's guardian was a perfectly reasonable decision. "You shouldn't wander off," Eliza said, though she had no authority to scold anyone. "It's dangerous, especially in the snow." "I can see the store from here." The girl was undeterred. She took a step closer, studying Eliza with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. "Are you sad?" The question, so direct and guileless, hit Eliza like a physical blow. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I think I am." "Why?" "How did you explain grief to a child? How did you put into words the way loss hollowed you out, left you a shell walking around in the shape of a person?" "I've lost some people I loved very much." The girl nodded solemnly. "I lost my mama. She got sick and died when I was 4. I don't remember her face much anymore, just how her voice sounded when she sang to me." Tears stung Eliza's eyes, the first tears she'd felt in weeks. Everything else had been dry and numb, but this child's simple honesty broke through something. "I'm sorry about your mama." "Thank you." The girl paused, then said, "Papa says it's okay to be sad about people who are gone. He says it means we love them. Your papa is a wise man, I guess." The child scuffed her boot in the snow. "He doesn't smile much anymore, though. And sometimes I hear him crying at night when he thinks I'm asleep." She looked up at Eliza. "Do you cry at night?" "Sometimes," Eliza admitted, "though lately I feel too tired even for that." They sat in silence for a moment, woman and child, both acquainted with loss. The snow continued its steady descent, and Eliza realized with distant surprise that she was shivering again. Maybe that was a good sign. Maybe her body had decided to keep fighting whether she wanted it to or not. "Do you like stories?" the girl asked suddenly. The question was so unexpected that Eliza blinked. "Stories?" "Books. Reading. Stories." The child's face brightened with enthusiasm. "I love stories. Papa tries to read to me, but he's not very good at it. He just says the words without making the voices different or anything. Mrs. Jenkins at church reads better, but I only see her on Sundays." Eliza hesitated. I used to like stories very much. I haven't read one in a while. Why not? Because reading required caring about something, and she'd used up all her caring, because stories had happy endings, and she didn't believe in those anymore, because opening a book felt like opening a door to a world she no longer had access to. I've been busy, she said instead. The girl looked skeptical, as if she could sense the lie. Then her expression transformed, lighting up with an idea that was clearly brilliant in her young mind. Can you read me a story? What? Can you read me a story, please? The child clasped her mittened hands together in a pleading gesture. I have a book in Mr. Thompson's wagon. It's about a princess who saves a dragon instead of the other way around. I've read it 100 times, but I want to hear how someone else tells it. Eliza stared at the girl. This small, persistent creature who had appeared out of the snow like something from a fairy tale herself. Every rational part of her brain said to decline politely, to send the child back to her Mr. Thompson, to return to the business of slowly freezing to death in peace. But then the girl said, Please, I don't have anyone else to ask. And something in those words, the loneliness, the hope, pierced through Eliza's carefully maintained numbness. I don't know, Eliza started to say. Please? Just one story? It's not even very long. And maybe it was because the girl's eyes reminded Eliza of her brother Thomas's eyes, gray and earnest and impossible to refuse. Maybe it was because someone was asking her for something, treating her as if she had value to offer. Maybe it was simply because saying yes was easier than explaining why she wanted to say no. All right, Eliza heard herself say. One story. The girl's face exploded into a smile so bright it seemed to push back the gathering darkness. Really? Oh, thank you. Wait right here. She turned and dashed toward the street, moving with the reckless speed of children who haven't yet learned to fear falling. Be careful, Eliza called after her, surprising herself with the automatic concern. The girl was already out of sight, vanished into the snow and shadows. Eliza sat on the bench, waiting, wondering what she'd just agreed to. She should leave. She should stand up right now and walk away before the child returned. Should find somewhere warm to die more comfortably. The girl would be disappointed for a moment, but children recovered from small disappointments. They were resilient in ways adults could never be again. But Eliza didn't move. She told herself it was because her legs were too numb, too cold, but that wasn't entirely true. The truth was that for the first time in months, someone had asked her for something that wasn't apology or explanation or defense of her continued existence. Someone had looked at her and seen not grief or failure or bad luck, but a person who might read a story. It was such a small thing, absurdly small. And yet, I got it. The girl reappeared, half running, half sliding through the snow, clutching a book wrapped in oilcloth. She stumbled on the platform steps and nearly dropped it, but caught herself with the instinctive grace of a child used to moving through the world alone. Sorry, I tried to run fast so you wouldn't get colder. I'm all right, Eliza said, though she wasn't sure that was true. What's your name, sweetheart? Maggie. Maggie Reed. The girl settled onto the bench beside Eliza, tucking herself close in a way that suggested she was starved for physical closeness. What's yours? Eliza. Eliza Hartwell. That's pretty. Eliza. Maggie tested the name on her tongue, seeming to approve. She carefully unwrapped the book and held it out. This is the Dragon Princess. My mama bought it for me before she got sick. Papa says it was the last present she ever gave me. Eliza took the book with hands that trembled. From cold or emotion, she couldn't tell. The cover was worn, clearly loved, clearly read 100 times, just as Maggie had said. A dragon and a princess faced each other on the illustrated front, but unusually, the princess stood in a protective stance in front of the dragon, sword drawn against unseen enemies. It looks wonderful, Eliza said quietly. It is. Maggie bounced slightly on the bench. The dragon's name is Ember, and she's actually really nice, but everyone thinks she's scary because she's a dragon, and the princess is named Adeline, and she doesn't care what anyone thinks. She knows Ember is good. Are you going to read it now? Eliza opened the book to the first page. The print was small, The light was fading, and her eyes burned with cold and unshed tears. Under any rational assessment, this was a terrible idea. But Maggie was looking at her with such hope, such trust, such absolute certainty that Eliza was capable of this simple gift. So Eliza began to read. Once upon a time, in a kingdom where mountains touched the clouds, there lived a dragon who had forgotten how to breathe fire. Her voice was rusty at first, uncertain, the words catching in her throat. But as she read, something strange happened. The story began to pull her in despite herself, and with it, the simple awareness of Maggie beside her, the child's warmth, her steady breathing, the way she leaned forward slightly during the exciting parts and sighed with satisfaction during the gentle ones. Eliza found herself doing the voices without thinking about it. The princess got a brave, determined tone. The dragon spoke with a soft rumble. The villains were appropriately menacing. Maggie watched her with wide eyes, utterly absorbed, occasionally whispering yes or oh no at the appropriate moments. They were 3 chapters in when a man's voice cut through the darkness. "Maggie, read. What in blazes do you think you're doing?" Both Eliza and Maggie jumped. Striding across the platform was a tall, rangy man in a heavy coat, his face shadowed by the brim of a worn hat. Even in the dim light from the station lamp, Eliza could see the tension in his shoulders, the worry and anger mixing in his expression. "Papa!" Maggie scrambled off the bench. "I was just... You wandered off without telling Mr. Thompson where you were going." The man, Maggie's father, reached them in 3 long strides. "I've been searching for you for the last 20 minutes. Do you have any idea how—" He stopped abruptly as his gaze fell on Eliza, really seeing her for the first time. Eliza stood on unsteady legs, clutching the book like a shield. She knew what he was seeing, a thin woman in travel-stained clothes sitting in the snow with his daughter, looking like nothing so much as a vagrant or worse. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "Your daughter was just asking me to read to her. I meant no harm. Miss Eliza is nice, Papa," Maggie interrupted, moving to stand between them as if to protect Eliza from her father's judgment. "She reads the voices perfectly, and she didn't wander off on purpose. She's just resting because she's cold and sad." "Maggie," the man's voice softened slightly, but his eyes never left Eliza's face. "Go find Mr. Thompson. Tell him I said to wait for me at the wagon." "But Papa—" "Now, Maggie." The girl looked torn, glancing between her father and Eliza with obvious distress. Finally, she thrust the book at Eliza. "You keep it," she said urgently, "so you can finish the story when you're warmer. Promise you'll finish it?" "Maggie," her father started. "Promise?" Maggie's eyes were pleading. Eliza clutched the book, overwhelmed by the gift of it, the trust. "I promise," she whispered. Satisfied, Maggie turned and trudged off the platform, casting worried looks over her shoulder until she disappeared into the darkness toward town. Silence fell between Eliza and the man. She waited for him to demand his daughter's book back, to accuse her of trying to steal it, or corrupt his child, or any of the dozen things she might be accused of. Instead, he just studied her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're the mail-order bride," he said finally. It wasn't a question. Eliza felt heat flood her frozen cheeks. "I was," she corrected. I was rejected. By Mr. Barlow." Henry Barlow's a fool. The statement was flat, matter-of-fact. "But that doesn't explain why you're still sitting here freezing to death instead of finding shelter." What could she say? That shelter cost money she didn't have? That walking into town and begging for help felt like more than she could bear? That part of her had hoped the cold would simply solve all her problems? "I was resting," she said finally, echoing what she'd told Maggie. The man made a sound that might have been a laugh or a scoff. "Resting. In a snowstorm. On a train platform." He shook his head. "Do you have anywhere to go?" The truth stuck in Eliza's throat. She wanted to lie, to preserve some shred of dignity, to tell this stern-faced stranger that she had plenty of options and was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. But she was so tired of pretending, so tired of carrying the weight of her own survival. "No," she said simply. "I don't have anywhere to go." He studied her for another long moment, and she watched something shift in his expression. Not pity exactly, but recognition. As if he understood what it meant to have nowhere left to go. "Can you cook?" The question was so unexpected that Eliza blinked. "What?" "Can you cook? Clean? Handle basic ranch work?" Yes, I grew up on a small farm. I can do all those things." "Good." He adjusted his hat, jaw working as if he was arguing with himself. "My ranch is about 5 miles out. I need help keeping house and looking after Maggie while I handle the stock and land. The last woman I hired ran off 3 weeks ago, said it was too isolated, too quiet. I can offer room and board and a small wage. Nothing fancy, but it's honest work." Eliza stared at him. "You're offering me a job? You don't even know me. I know you kept my daughter safe when you could have ignored her. I know you read to her even though you look about ready to collapse. I know Henry Barlow rejected you, which in my experience is usually a sign that someone has both intelligence and integrity." His mouth quirked in something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "And I know that if I leave you here, you'll likely be dead by morning. Call me sentimental, but I'd prefer to avoid that." "Why?" The word came out harsher than she intended. "Why would you help me?" For the first time, the man's stern expression softened completely. "Because someone helped me once, when I needed it. Because my daughter just spent the last 20 minutes explaining to me in great detail how you're sad like Papa is sad, and anyone who's that sad deserves kindness instead of more hardship." He held out his hand. "Name's Jonah Reed. And before you ask, no, I'm not looking for a wife. I'm looking for help. Nothing more." Eliza looked at his outstretched hand, at this unexpected lifeline thrown to her in the darkness. Every instinct she had screamed that this was suspicious, that men didn't offer jobs to strange women out of kindness, that there had to be a catch. But then again, she'd gotten on a train to marry a stranger based on nothing but letters. She'd gambled her entire future on the hope that somewhere in the West she might find a place to belong. That gamble had failed spectacularly, but maybe, just maybe, this was the universe giving her another chance. Or maybe she was too cold and too tired and too hungry to think straight, and she'd regret this decision in the morning. Either way, she reached out and took Jonah Reed's hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking on the words. "Thank you." His grip was firm, warm, steady, everything she wasn't. "Can you ride?" "Not well, but I can hold on." "That'll do." He released her hand and picked up her carpet bag without asking permission. "Come on, Mr. Thompson's wagon is warm, and there's hot coffee in a thermos if you need it." Eliza followed him off the platform, her legs shaky and uncertain beneath her. Behind her, the empty bench was already disappearing beneath fresh snow, erasing all evidence that she'd ever been there, that she'd ever sat there ready to give up. She clutched Maggie's book to her chest and thought about princesses who protected dragons, and dragons who had forgotten how to breathe fire. She thought about small girls with gray eyes who asked impossible questions, and fathers who offered kindness to strangers. Maybe, she thought as she followed Jonah Reed through the snow toward the warm glow of town lights, maybe this was the beginning of a different story than the one she'd thought she was living. Maybe this was the part where the abandoned mail-order bride stopped being abandoned and became something else. She didn't know what yet. She didn't dare to hope. But at least, she was moving forward instead of slowly freezing on a bench. And for tonight, that would have to be enough. The wagon ride to Jonah Reed's ranch passed in a blur of cold wind and darker cold silence. Eliza sat wedged between Mr. Thompson, a grizzled man who smelled of tobacco and said nothing beyond a grunt of greeting, and a stack of supply crates that shifted with every rut in the frozen road. Maggie had climbed into the back despite her father's protests, wrapping herself in a horse blanket and humming quietly to herself, occasionally calling out observations about the snow or the stars or a rabbit she thought she saw in the darkness. Jonah rode alongside on a bay horse that looked as worn and weather-beaten as its owner, his posture easy in the saddle despite the limp Eliza had noticed when he'd walked. A war injury, she guessed, though she didn't ask. She'd learned long ago that some wounds were better left unspoken. The hot coffee Jonah had mentioned turned out to be real. Mr. Thompson had thrust a battered thermos at her without a word, and she'd drunk it gratefully despite the bitter taste and the way it burned her tongue. The warmth spreading through her chest felt almost painful after so many hours of numbness, as if her body was punishing her for nearly giving up on it. "You all right, miss?" Mr. Thompson asked about halfway through the journey, the first words he'd spoken since they left Silver Creek. "Yes," Eliza said, though her teeth were chattering. "Thank you for the coffee." He grunted again, which seemed to be his primary form of communication, and didn't speak again for the rest of the ride. The Reed Ranch appeared out of the darkness like something from a dream, or perhaps a memory of something that had once been beautiful but had fallen into neglect. A two-story house with a wide porch stood at the center of the property. Flanking it on either side were a barn, a stable, and several smaller outbuildings that Eliza couldn't quite make out in the dark. Everything looked solid enough, well built, but there was an air of abandonment about the place, as if the ranch itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to change. "Home," Maggie announced from the back of the wagon, popping her head up like a prairie dog. "We're home." Jonah dismounted with practiced ease despite his limp, then came around to help Eliza down from the wagon. His hands were gentle but impersonal, and he released her the moment her feet touched solid ground. "Thank you, Thompson," he said to the older man. "I'll settle up with you next week when I come into town." "No rush, Jonah. You know I trust you for it." Thompson tipped his hat to Eliza. "Ma'am, hope you find what you're looking for here." Eliza wasn't sure what she was looking for anymore, so she simply nodded and watched as the wagon creaked away into the darkness, leaving her alone with Jonah Reed and his daughter in a place that was supposed to be her new home, at least for now. "Come on," Jonah said, picking up her carpet bag again. "Let's get you inside before you freeze solid." The house was dark and cold when they entered, but Jonah moved through it with the confidence of long familiarity, striking matches and lighting lamps until a warm glow pushed back the shadows. Maggie dashed ahead, shedding her coat and mittens in a trail that Jonah sighed at but didn't comment on. Eliza stood in the doorway, taking in what little she could see. The front room was large, dominated by a stone fireplace that clearly hadn't been lit in hours. Furniture clustered around it, a worn sofa, 2 chairs, a low table covered in what looked like Maggie's drawings. To the left, she could see a dining table with mismatched chairs, and beyond that, a doorway that presumably led to the kitchen. Everything was clean enough, but there was a masculine carelessness to the space, a sense that people lived here but didn't quite inhabit it. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, no decorative touches or softness anywhere. It was a house that had forgotten how to be a home. "Papa, I'm hungry," Maggie announced, reappearing from wherever she'd vanished to. "When are you not hungry?" Jonah was already moving toward the fireplace, kneeling to build up the fire with practiced efficiency. "Eliza, the kitchen's through there. If you're up to it, there's bread and butter in the pantry and some cold ham from last night. Nothing fancy, but it'll do for tonight." He said it casually, as if it was a simple request, but Eliza understood what he was really doing, giving her a task, a purpose, a way to earn her place rather than feel like a charity case. She appreciated it more than he probably knew. "Of course," she said, and moved toward the kitchen before her legs could remember they were exhausted. The kitchen was larger than she'd expected, with a cast-iron stove, a deep sink with a pump handle, and counters that looked sturdy if somewhat battered. Cabinets lined one wall, and a pantry door stood open, revealing neat rows of preserves, flour, sugar, and other staples. Someone had organized this space with care once, though that care was clearly years in the past. Eliza found the bread wrapped in cloth, the butter in a crock, the ham in the cold box that was actually cold thanks to the winter temperatures. Her hands moved automatically, slicing bread, spreading butter, arranging food on plates she found in one of the cabinets. It felt strange to be performing such domestic tasks in a stranger's house, but also oddly comforting. This, at least, she knew how to do. She brought the simple meal out to find that Jonah had gotten the fire roaring and Maggie had curled up on the sofa, fighting sleep with the determined stubbornness of a child who didn't want to miss anything. "Thank you," Jonah said, taking the plate she offered. "Maggie, sit at the table properly." "But, Papa," "Table. Now." Maggie dragged herself to the table with exaggerated suffering, though she perked up once she started eating. Eliza sat down carefully in one of the chairs, her own plate in front of her, and forced herself to eat slowly, despite the gnawing hunger in her stomach. The food was simple but good, and she had to stop herself from devouring it like an animal. Jonah ate standing up, leaning against the fireplace mantel, studying Eliza with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not hostile, but assessing, trying to figure out what kind of person he'd just invited into his home. "So," he said finally, "I suppose we should establish some ground rules." "Of course." Eliza set down her bread, meeting his gaze directly. If he was going to throw her out, better to know now than later. "First, like I said, I'm not looking for a wife. I tried that once, and—" He glanced at Maggie, who was now focused entirely on her food. "It ended. I'm not interested in trying again. This is a job, nothing more. Room, board, and $5 a month." "Fair?" "More than fair, Sal," Eliza said quietly. "Thank you. Second, Maggie is my priority. Everything else comes after her safety and well-being. If I think you're putting her at risk in any way—" "I would never hurt a child," Eliza interrupted, surprising herself with the fierceness in her voice. "Never." Jonah studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you, but I had to say it." "I understand. Third, I don't pry into people's pasts, and I'd appreciate the same courtesy. You're running from something. I can see that. I don't need to know what. But if trouble follows you here, I need to know about it before it arrives. Deal?" Eliza's throat tightened. Should she tell him now about Caleb Rourke? About the man who'd murdered her family and might someday come looking for the only witness who'd escaped? But no. Rourke thought she'd died in the fire with the others. That's what the newspapers had reported. As far as the world knew, the entire Hartwell family had perished. She was safe. She had to believe she was safe. "Deal," she said. "And I promise, if there's any danger, you'll know." "Good." Jonah pushed away from the mantel. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. It's not much, but it's warm enough. Bathroom's at the end of the hall. The water pump is temperamental, but it works if you're patient with it. Maggie's room is across from yours. Mine is downstairs off the kitchen. Any questions?" 1,000 questions crowded Eliza's mind, but she shook her head. "Not tonight. Thank you, Mr. Reed." "Jonah," he corrected. "No need for formality when it's just us." "Jonah, then. And you can call me Eliza." "I know. Maggie told me approximately 47 times on the way back into town." His mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "My daughter has apparently decided you're the answer to all her problems. Fair warning." Eliza glanced at Maggie, who was now nodding over her plate, fighting a losing battle against sleep. "She's a sweet child." "She's a handful," Jonah said, but there was such love in his voice that it made Eliza's chest ache. He moved to his daughter, scooping her up with ease. "Come on, little bird, time for bed." "But Miss Eliza didn't finish the story," Maggie mumbled against her father's shoulder. "Miss Eliza can finish it tomorrow. She's not going anywhere." Was she? Eliza found herself wondering even as she nodded agreement. She thought she wasn't going anywhere when she got off the train to meet Henry Barlow either. Nothing in her life felt permanent anymore, and perhaps that was simply how things were now. Temporary moments strung together, each one potentially the last. Jonah carried Maggie toward the stairs, then paused and looked back at Eliza. "There's a nightgown of my wife's in the dresser in your room. She was taller than you, but it should work well enough until we can get you proper clothes. Help yourself to whatever you need." The casual mention of his dead wife sent a pang through Eliza's chest. "Thank you. That's very kind." He shrugged, as if kindness was nothing remarkable, then disappeared up the stairs with his sleeping daughter. Eliza sat alone in the now quiet kitchen, listening to the creak of floorboards above, the murmur of Jonah's voice as he put Maggie to bed, the pop and crackle of the fire. She should clean up the dishes. She should go upstairs to her room. She should do something productive to justify the space she was taking up in this house. Instead, she just sat there, letting the warmth seep into her bones, letting the exhaustion she'd been holding at bay finally crash over her like a wave. She'd been so close to giving up, so close to just stopping, to letting the cold and grief finally win. But Maggie had asked her to read a story, and Jonah had offered her a job. And now here she was, in a warm house, with food in her stomach and a place to sleep, and it felt like more than she deserved and less than she needed all at once. You still awake down there? Jonah's voice carried down from upstairs. Yes, Eliza called back, forcing herself to stand and begin clearing the dishes. Leave those. You look dead on your feet. Get some rest. Tomorrow's soon enough to start earning your keep. Eliza wanted to protest, but her body had reached its limit. She gathered her carpet bag, climbed the stairs on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, and found the second door on the right, just as Jonah had described. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that would probably offer a view of the ranch in daylight. A quilt in a faded star pattern covered the bed. And yes, there in the dresser she found a nightgown in soft white cotton, carefully folded as if waiting for its owner to return. Eliza changed quickly in the cold room, then slipped under the quilt and let her eyes fall closed. Through the walls she could hear Jonah moving around downstairs, banking the fire, checking locks, doing all the small tasks that people do to prepare for sleep. And from across the hall, so faint she almost missed it, came Maggie's voice. Papa, is Miss Eliza really going to stay? For now, little bird, try to sleep. I hope she stays forever. I like her. I know you do, but don't get too attached, all right? People don't always stay. Mama didn't stay, Maggie said, and the sadness in those 3 words made Eliza's throat close. No, Jonah agreed softly. Mama didn't stay, but that wasn't her choice, remember? She loved you more than anything. Do you think Miss Eliza is sad like us? A long pause, then, yes, sweetheart. I think she's sad like us. Then maybe we can be sad together. That's better than being sad alone. Maybe it is. Now sleep, Maggie. No more questions. Eliza lay in the darkness of her borrowed room, in a dead woman's nightgown, in a house full of grief that matched her own, and felt the first stirrings of something she couldn't quite name. Not hope. She wasn't ready for hope, but perhaps the willingness to try, the willingness to see what tomorrow might bring, instead of wishing it wouldn't come at all. She fell asleep clutching Maggie's book, and for the first time in months, she didn't dream of fire. Morning came too early and too bright, sunlight streaming through the uncurtained window to wake Eliza from the deepest sleep she'd had since before the fire. For a moment, she forgot where she was, panic surging through her chest until she recognized the unfamiliar room, remembered the events of the previous night, and felt the panic slowly recede into something like cautious relief. She was still here, still alive, still, somehow, being given another chance. Downstairs, she could hear movement. The clatter of dishes, Maggie's high voice asking questions, Jonah's deeper tones responding. The smell of coffee drifted up through the floorboards, making her stomach growl with interest. Eliza dressed quickly in one of her 2 dresses, the better one, though both were worn past the point of respectability, and made her way downstairs to find the kitchen already occupied. Jonah stood at the stove, flipping flapjacks with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing it for years. Maggie sat at the table, swinging her legs and chattering about something involving horses and snow and a story she'd heard at school. Neither of them noticed Eliza at first, and she took the opportunity to simply observe. In daylight, Jonah looked younger than she'd initially thought, probably not yet 35, though the lines around his eyes suggested he'd seen more than his share of hardship. His dark hair was slightly too long, as if he kept forgetting to cut it, and he moved with a careful economy that spoke of old pain-managed daily. The limp was more pronounced in the morning, she noticed, though he didn't seem to let it slow him down. Maggie, on the other hand, was pure energy barely contained in a small body. She'd apparently already been outside, if the snow melting on her boots was any indication, and her cheeks were flushed with cold and excitement. "Morning," Eliza said quietly from the doorway. Both of them turned, and Maggie's face lit up like the sunrise. "Miss Eliza, you're awake. Papa said I had to let you sleep, but I've been waiting forever, and I wanted to show you the barn and the horses, and I found an icicle this big." She spread her arms wide. "And Papa said you could have coffee if you want. And are you going to finish the story today?" "Maggie, breathe," Jonah said mildly, sliding flapjacks onto a plate. "Give the woman a chance to wake up before you drown her in questions." He nodded at Eliza. "Coffee's on the stove. Cups are in the cabinet above. Breakfast is almost ready." "Thank you." Eliza poured herself coffee in a chipped mug and sat down at the table, accepting the plate Jonah handed her a moment later. The flapjacks were simple but good, and she ate with more appetite than she'd had in months. Jonah sat down across from her with his own plate, studying her with that same assessing gaze from the night before. "You look better than you did. Less like a ghost." "I feel better. Thank you for all of this." He shrugged. "Like I said, I need the help. Speaking of which, what are you good at besides reading stories?" "I can cook, clean, mend clothes, tend a garden, preserve food, milk cows, gather eggs. Basically, anything that needs doing on a farm or ranch." Eliza paused. "I'm not much good with horses, and I've never handled cattle, but I'm willing to learn." "Don't need you for cattle work. I've got 2 ranch hands who come in during the day, Abel and Sam. They handle the heavy work with the stock." Jonah gestured vaguely at the house around them. "What I need is someone to keep this place from falling apart entirely. Cooking, cleaning, looking after Maggie when I'm out working, making sure we don't run out of basic supplies. The last woman I hired lasted 3 weeks before she decided the isolation was driving her mad and ran off with a traveling peddler." "I don't mind isolation," Eliza said quietly. "Sometimes it's preferable to company." Something flickered in Jonah's expression. "Understanding, maybe." "Fair enough. Well, the house is yours to manage however you see fit. I don't care about decorating or any of that, but if you want to make changes, go ahead. Just keep me fed, keep Maggie safe, and keep the place from burning down, and we'll get along fine." "Can Miss Eliza teach me things?" Maggie asked suddenly, looking up from her flapjacks. "Like how to sew better? Mrs. Henderson says my stitches are terrible." "Mrs. Henderson says everyone's stitches are terrible except her own," Jonah said dryly. "But yes, if Miss Eliza is willing to teach you, that's fine." "I'd be happy to," Eliza said, surprised by how much she meant it. When had she last taught anyone anything? When had she last felt capable of teaching? Maggie beamed. "And you'll finish the story today?" "I'll finish the story," Eliza promised. The rest of breakfast passed in relative quiet, Jonah occasionally explaining aspects of the ranch routine while Maggie interjected with her own observations and opinions. After they finished eating, Jonah stood and reached for his coat. "I need to check on the cattle in the north pasture. Abel and Sam should be here within the hour. They know to come to the house if they need anything. Maggie, you help Miss Eliza with whatever she needs, understood?" "Yes, Papa." "And Eliza, take it easy today. Get your bearings. Settle in. Tomorrow's soon enough to start a proper routine." He paused at the door, looking back. "And if you need anything, ring the bell on the front porch. I'll hear it and come back." Then he was gone, limping out into the bright, cold morning, leaving Eliza alone with his daughter and the overwhelming task of figuring out what her life was supposed to look like now. "So," Maggie said brightly, "do you want to see my room first, or should we do the story first? Or maybe—" "How about," Eliza interrupted gently, "we start by cleaning up breakfast, and then I'll read you the next chapter of your book while we work on other chores. That way we can do both." Maggie considered this, then nodded sagely. "That's a good compromise. Papa says compromises are important." "Your papa is right." They washed dishes together, Maggie chattering the entire time about school, which she attended 3 days a week in town when Mr. Thompson could give them a ride. Her friends, Emma was nice but bossy, Jacob was funny but picked his nose. And her favorite things, horses, snow, stories, her papa, and cookies, though not necessarily in that order. Eliza found herself relaxing into the conversation, into the simple domesticity of it all. This was familiar territory, kitchen work, childcare, the rhythms of maintaining a household. She might not know what her future held, but she knew how to wash dishes and listen to a child's stories and keep a house running. These were skills that mattered, that had value. "My room is a mess," Maggie announced as they climbed the stairs, Eliza carrying the now precious storybook. "Papa says I'm like a tornado that picks up everything and puts it down somewhere else." The assessment turned out to be accurate. Maggie's room was a cheerful disaster, clothes scattered across the floor, drawings pinned haphazardly to the walls, a collection of rocks and feathers and other treasures arranged on the windowsill. The bed was unmade, quilts tangled like Maggie had fought them in her sleep. All right, Eliza said, surveying the chaos with amusement rather than judgment. Here's what we'll do. I'll read the next chapter while you pick up your clothes and put them in the dresser. Sound fair? That sounds perfect. Maggie immediately started gathering armfuls of dresses and stockings, dumping them enthusiastically into drawers without any apparent organization system. Eliza settled into the small chair by the window and opened the book to where they'd left off the night before. Chapter 4. The Dragon's Secret, she began, and was immediately transported back into the story. Princess Adeline was trying to understand why Ember the dragon couldn't breathe fire anymore, and what Eliza had initially dismissed as a simple children's tale was revealing surprising depth about fear and loss and finding courage when you thought you had none left. She read while Maggie worked, making the voices distinct and clear, pausing at the exciting parts, letting the emotional moments breathe. Maggie listened even as she moved around the room, occasionally stopping completely to stare at Eliza during particularly intense passages. When Eliza reached the end of the chapter, a cliffhanger where Princess Adeline discovered the truth about why Ember had lost her fire, Maggie actually gasped. "No! What happens next?" "That's all for now," Eliza said, closing the book with a smile. "Otherwise, you'll have no incentive to keep your room clean tomorrow." "That's mean," Maggie said, but she was grinning. "You're like Papa. You use stories to make me behave." "Does it work?" "Sometimes." Maggie flopped onto her now-made bed. "Do you have a family, Miss Eliza? Papa said not to ask questions, but I'm just curious." The question hit Eliza like a fist to the chest, stealing her breath for a moment. "I did," she said carefully. "They died a few months ago." "Oh." Maggie's expression crumpled with sympathy. "That's terrible. Were you sad?" "Very sad. I'm still sad, actually." "Me too. About Mama." Maggie picked at her quilt. "Sometimes I forget to be sad because I'm busy, and then I remember and feel bad that I forgot." I don't think that's wrong," Eliza said softly. "I think that's how grief works. It comes and goes like waves. Your mama wouldn't want you to be sad all the time." "Papa says that too." Maggie looked up, eyes shining with unshed tears. "Do you think people can be happy again after someone dies? Or are they just pretending?" It was such a profound question from such a small person that Eliza had to take a moment to consider her answer. "I think," she said slowly, "that happiness looks different after. It's not the same as before, but it can still be real. Does that make sense?" Maggie nodded slowly. "I think so. Papa laughs sometimes now. Not a lot, but sometimes. And it seems real." "Then it probably is." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people acquainted with loss finding unexpected kinship in a child's bedroom. Then Maggie brightened suddenly, shaking off the melancholy like a dog shaking off water. "Want to see the barn? We have 4 horses and 17 chickens, and a cat named Bucket, who doesn't like anyone but me and Papa." Eliza laughed despite herself. "A cat named Bucket?" "She was found in a bucket when she was a kitten. Papa said it was easier to just call her that than think up something fancy." "Your Papa has a point. All right, show me the barn." The tour of the ranch took most of the morning. The barn was well maintained despite everything else. The horses healthy and friendly, the chickens chaotic but productive. Bucket the cat proved to be as antisocial as advertised, hissing at Eliza from the hayloft before disappearing entirely. Maggie showed her everything with proprietorial pride: the tack room, the feed storage, the small vegetable garden that was dormant under snow but would need attention come spring. Abel and Sam appeared around mid-morning, 2 weather-beaten men in their 40s who tipped their hats to Eliza and made no comment about her sudden appearance beyond welcoming her to the ranch. They had their own work to attend to, and after brief pleasantries, they headed off to join Jonah with the cattle. By noon, Eliza had a better sense of the property and its rhythms. It wasn't a large operation, maybe 50 head of cattle, the small string of horses, the chickens, and a few other animals she hadn't met yet. But it was Jonah's, maintained through hard work and determination, and she could see the care he took with it even in small details. She made lunch from the supplies in the pantry, soup from preserved vegetables and salt pork, fresh bread that she'd started early in the morning while Maggie was still organizing her room. When Jonah returned at 1 o'clock with Abel and Sam, He stopped in the doorway and simply stared at the set table, the steaming bowls, the smell of fresh bread filling the kitchen. "Something wrong?" Eliza asked, suddenly worried she'd overstepped. "No," Jonah said quietly. "Just hasn't smelled like this in here since—" He didn't finish the sentence, but she understood. They ate together, the three men discussing ranch business, while Maggie told Eliza in great detail about every single chicken and its personality. After lunch, Abel and Sam returned to work, and Jonah lingered for a moment. "Thank you," he said to Eliza, "for the food, and for—" He gestured vaguely at Maggie, who was already pulling on her coat to go back outside. "Keeping her entertained. She's been happier today than I've seen her in weeks." "She's easy to spend time with," Eliza said honestly. "She can be. She can also be a terror." But he was smiling when he said it, that rare expression that transformed his stern face into something almost boyish. "I'll be back before dark. There's meat in the cold box if you want to make something for supper." "I'll figure something out." He nodded and left, and Eliza spent the afternoon settling into routines: laundry, mending, planning meals, organizing the kitchen the way she preferred. Simple, mundane tasks that nonetheless gave her a sense of purpose she'd been missing for far too long. That evening, after a supper of roasted chicken and potatoes that Jonah praised with genuine appreciation, they sat by the fire together. Maggie brought out her book again, and this time Jonah listened too. His eyes closed as Eliza read about Princess Adeline's determination to help Ember remember her fire. When Maggie finally fell asleep against her father's shoulder, Jonah carried her upstairs without waking her. He returned a few minutes later to find Eliza banking the fire for the night. "She told me you explained grief to her," he said without preamble. "Thank you for that. I've tried, but I'm not good with words." "You're good enough," Eliza said. "She knows you love her. That's what matters." Jonah was quiet for a moment, then, "My wife, Rebecca, she died 2 years ago. Fever. It came on fast, took her in less than a week. Maggie barely remembers her now, and that—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "That might be a mercy. I don't know." "I'm sorry," Eliza said, because what else was there to say? "Me too." He moved to the window looking out at the snow-covered yard. "I wasn't lying when I said I'm not looking for a wife. I don't have room in my life for that kind of complication. But I'm grateful you're here. Today felt almost normal, in a good way." "I'm grateful too," Eliza admitted. "Yesterday I thought I was done. Finished. And today I made bread and did laundry and read stories, and it felt like maybe I could survive after all." Jonah turned to look at her, and in the firelight, his expression was gentle. "We're all just surviving, Eliza. Some days better than others. But yeah, I think you can survive. I think maybe we all can if we just keep getting up in the morning." It wasn't a profound statement, and it certainly wasn't poetry. But standing in that warm kitchen with a man who understood grief the way she did, Eliza felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope exactly, but perhaps the willingness to believe that hope might be possible again someday. "Good night, Jonah," she said softly. "Good night, Eliza. See you in the morning." And as she climbed the stairs to her borrowed room in a house that was beginning to feel less strange, Eliza realized that yes, she would see them in the morning, and the morning after that, and the one after that, for as long as they would have her. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't even the life she'd hoped for when she'd stepped off that train in Silver Creek. But maybe, just maybe, it was the life she needed. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt almost like healing. Eliza rose each morning before dawn to start the fire and prepare breakfast, finding a quiet satisfaction in the predictable routines of ranch life. Jonah worked from sunrise to sunset, his presence steady and undemanding, while Maggie filled the house with laughter and questions and an energy that seemed inexhaustible. They became a unit of sorts, 3 broken pieces that somehow fit together into something that functioned, if not perfectly, then well enough. Eliza had almost convinced herself that she could stay here forever, that the past was finally past, that Caleb Rourke would never find her because he believed she was dead and buried alongside her family. She should have known that peace was always temporary, that danger had a way of finding you no matter how carefully you hid. The morning it all fell apart started like any other. Jonah had ridden out early to check fence lines in the western pasture. Abel and Sam were mucking out the stables, and Maggie had begged to help Eliza in the barn, promising she'd be careful and responsible, and all the things 7-year-old girls promise when they want something badly enough. "Can I climb up to the loft?" Maggie asked, already halfway up the ladder before Eliza could answer. "I want to check on Bucket's new kittens." "Be careful," Eliza called, carrying an armful of fresh straw to the horse stalls. "And don't try to pick up the kittens if Bucket is being protective." "I won't," Maggie's voice floated down from above, followed by her delighted squeal. "Oh, Miss Eliza, there are 5 of them, and they're so tiny," and the scream that followed was pure terror. Eliza dropped the straw and ran, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached the base of the ladder just as Maggie fell, tumbling through the air in what seemed like horrible slow motion. The girl's body hit the ground with a sickening thud, her head striking the corner of a wooden feed trough, and then she was lying there motionless, blood already pooling beneath her. "Maggie!" Eliza was on her knees beside the child, her hands trembling as she checked for breathing, for a pulse, for any sign of life. Maggie's chest rose and fell. Thank everything, she was breathing, but her eyes were closed and blood was pouring from a gash on her temple, soaking into her hair, staining Eliza's hands red. "Help!" Eliza screamed toward the stable, her voice breaking. "Abel! Sam! Someone help!" She pressed her hand against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, but it kept coming, hot and slick between her fingers. Maggie's face was too pale, her breathing too shallow, and Eliza could feel panic rising in her throat like bile. "Don't you die," she whispered fiercely. "Don't you dare die, Maggie Reed. Your father needs you. I need you. Stay with me." Abel appeared in the barn doorway, took one look at the scene, and went white. "Sweet mercy, what happened?" "She fell from the loft. Get Jonah, now!" Eliza's voice was sharp with command, with desperation. "And send Sam for the doctor in town." Abel ran and Eliza focused on the child in her arms. The bleeding was slowing. Head wounds always bled worse than they were, she told herself, even as her heart screamed that this was bad. This was very bad. She needed bandages. She needed help. She needed... Maggie's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Miss... Eliza?" "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." Eliza's voice shook despite her best efforts. "You fell, but you're going to be fine. Just stay still for me, all right?" "Hurts," Maggie whimpered and started to cry, thin, frightened sounds that broke Eliza's heart. "I know it hurts, I know, but you're so brave, Maggie. So brave." Eliza looked around frantically, spotted a horse blanket folded on a nearby bench. She couldn't leave Maggie to get it, couldn't risk moving her, couldn't... Her own shirtwaist. It was old anyway, already stained with work. Eliza grabbed the hem and tore, ripping a long strip of fabric free. She pressed it against Maggie's wound, applying pressure the way her mother had taught her years ago when Thomas had split his chin open falling from a tree. "Tell me a story," Maggie whispered, her small hand finding Eliza's. "The princess. And the dragon." Eliza's throat closed with emotion, but she forced words out past the fear. "Once there was a princess who loved a dragon," she began, her voice rough. "And the dragon had forgotten how to breathe fire. But the princess knew. She knew that the fire was still inside, just waiting to be remembered." Maggie's eyes were closing again, and panic surged through Eliza. No, stay awake, sweetheart. Keep your eyes on me. Can you do that? Just keep looking at me." "Tired." "I know, but you need to stay awake. Just until your papa gets here. He's coming, I promise. He's coming," and... The barn door crashed open and Jonah was there, his face a mask of controlled terror. He crossed the distance in 3 strides, despite his limp, dropped to his knees beside them, and his hands hovered over his daughter as if he was afraid to touch her, afraid she might break beneath his fingers. "What happened?" His voice was deadly calm in a way that was somehow worse than shouting. "She fell from the loft, hit her head on the trough. She's bleeding, but she's conscious, breathing steady." Eliza was babbling, she knew, but couldn't seem to stop. "I've been keeping pressure on the wound, and Sam went for the doctor and..." "Papa?" Maggie's voice was so small, so frightened. "I'm here, little bird." Jonah's hand finally settled on his daughter's arm, gentle as a prayer. Papa's here. You're going to be just fine. Hurts, Maggie said again, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. I know it hurts. Oh, but Miss Eliza is taking good care of you, and the doctor is coming, and his voice cracked just for a moment before he pulled it back under control. And you're going to be fine because you're strong, Maggie. You're my strong girl. They waited like that, the three of them frozen in a tableau of fear and love, while Abel hovered anxiously in the doorway and the minutes stretched into eternities. Eliza kept talking, kept telling the story about Princess Adeline and Ember the dragon, kept Maggie's attention focused on anything but the pain. Jonah held his daughter's hand and didn't look away from her face, as if he could keep her alive through sheer force of will. When Maggie's eyes started to drift closed again, real panic edged into Jonah's voice. Maggie, stay awake. Look at me. Look at Papa. So tired. I know, but you can't sleep yet. Not yet. Talk to me. Tell me about the kittens. You saw Bucket's kittens, right? 5, Maggie whispered. 5 little ones. Eliza met Jonah's eyes over his daughter's body and saw her own terror reflected there. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped, and Maggie was too pale, too drowsy, too still. Where was the doctor? How long did it take to ride 5 miles into town and back? I'm sorry, Eliza said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I should have watched her more carefully. I should have made her stay on the ground. I should have... Don't. Jonah's voice was sharp. Don't apologize for an accident. Kids fall. It's what they do. He swallowed hard. You kept her alive. You stopped the bleeding. That's what matters. But Eliza could see the question in his eyes, the one he was too fair to ask aloud. Why did you let my daughter climb that ladder? Why weren't you watching more carefully? Why didn't you keep her safe? She had no answers, only the terrible weight of guilt and the prayer that Maggie would survive to give her the chance to make it right. The doctor finally arrived an hour later, an hour that felt like days, and took over with brisk efficiency. He cleaned the wound, pronouncing it nasty but not catastrophic, and stitched Maggie's head while she whimpered and Jonah held her still, and Eliza stood uselessly to the side, her hands still covered in drying blood. She'll need to rest for several days, the doctor said, bandaging the wound with practiced hands. No running, no playing, no excitement. Watch for signs of confusion, excessive drowsiness, vomiting. If any of those appear, come get me immediately. I will, Jonah said. Thank you, Doc. Just doing my job. The doctor packed up his bag, then fixed Eliza with a stern look. You did good work here, keeping pressure on the wound. Probably saved her from losing too much blood. Head wounds can be tricky. Bleed like the devil, but often look worse than they are. Eliza nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. After the doctor left, Jonah carefully lifted Maggie, who was now groggy but stable, and carried her toward the house. Eliza followed at a distance, feeling like an intruder, like someone who had forfeited her right to be part of this family in the moment she'd let Maggie get hurt. They settled Maggie in her bed with extra pillows and blankets, and she fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by pain and fear. Jonah sat beside her, one hand resting on her arm as if to reassure himself she was still breathing, still alive. Eliza stood in the doorway, unsure whether to stay or go, to speak or remain silent. Finally, she said, I'll make some broth, something light for when she wakes up. Jonah didn't look away from his daughter. Thank you. The words were polite but distant, and Eliza felt the gap between them opening like a chasm. She retreated to the kitchen, scrubbed the blood from her hands until her skin was raw, and tried to stop shaking. She'd almost lost Maggie. This child who'd become so important so quickly, who'd asked her to read stories and taught her how to laugh again. Eliza had almost let her die through carelessness, through a moment of inattention that could have cost everything. The broth went forgotten on the stove as Eliza sank into a chair and finally let herself cry, deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere primal and terrified. She'd already lost everyone she loved once. She couldn't bear to lose anyone else. She couldn't survive it. She didn't hear Jonah enter the kitchen until he spoke. Eliza. She looked up, wiping desperately at her face, trying to compose herself. I'm sorry, Stop apologizing. He crossed to where she sat and, to her complete surprise, pulled her to her feet and into his arms. It wasn't romantic, wasn't anything but human comfort offered to someone who desperately needed it. She's alive. She's going to be fine. That's what matters. Eliza sobbed against his shoulder, her hands clutching his shirt, and he just held her and let her break apart in the safety of his strength. When she finally pulled back, embarrassed and exhausted, he handed her a handkerchief without comment. "I should have been more careful," she said, her voice hoarse. "Kids are unpredictable. You can't watch them every second." Jonah moved to the window, looking out at the darkening yard. "When Rebecca died, I blame myself for weeks. Should have gotten the doctor sooner, should have noticed she was sick earlier, should have done something different. But the truth is, sometimes bad things just happen. All we can do is deal with the aftermath." "How do you live with that?" Eliza asked. "With knowing you can't protect the people you love from everything?" "You don't live with it. You just live despite it." He turned back to face her. "Eliza, what you did today, keeping pressure on the wound, keeping her calm, keeping her awake, that probably saved her life. The doctor said as much. So please, stop carrying guilt that isn't yours to carry." Eliza wanted to believe him. She wanted to let go of the crushing weight of responsibility and fear. But before she could respond, before she could try to explain why letting people down felt like her defining characteristic lately, Abel appeared in the kitchen doorway with an expression that sent ice through her veins. "Jonah, there's a man here asking for Eliza. Says his name is Caleb Rourke, and he's looking for his fiancée." The world stopped. Everything stopped. Eliza couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at Abel's concerned face and feel reality crumbling around her. No, it wasn't possible. Caleb Rourke thought she was dead. He had no reason to come looking for her here, no way to know she'd survived. "Eliza?" Jonah's voice was sharp. "Who is Caleb Rourke?" She couldn't speak. Her tongue felt thick and useless in her mouth. All she could see was flames, her parents' bodies, Thomas's face, in the moment before the barn roof collapsed. All she could hear was Rourke's voice promising he'd make them pay for testifying against his brother, his laughter as he'd locked the barn doors from the outside and struck the match. "Eliza!" Jonah grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to focus on his face. "Who is he?" "The man who murdered my family," she whispered. "The man who burned them alive." Jonah's expression went absolutely still. And in that stillness, Eliza saw the soldier he must have been during the war, controlled, dangerous, capable of violence when necessary. "Stay here," he said quietly. "Lock the door behind me. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "No, Jonah, he's dangerous. I said stay here." It wasn't a request. "Abel, go up and watch Maggie. If anything happens to me, you take both of them and ride straight to the sheriff." "Jonah, I don't think," Abel started. "That's an order." Jonah moved toward the front door with the steady purpose of someone walking toward a fight they knew was coming. "Lock this door, Eliza." She wanted to argue, wanted to run, wanted to do anything but stand there frozen while Jonah walked out to confront a murderer. But her body wouldn't obey her commands, wouldn't do anything but shake and remember and fall apart. Abel gave her a worried look, then headed upstairs toward Maggie's room. Eliza forced her legs to move, forced herself to go to the door, and turn the lock as Jonah had ordered. Through the window, she could see a figure on horseback in the yard, illuminated by the light spilling from the barn. Even in shadow, she recognized Caleb Rourke's lean frame, the way he sat his horse with casual arrogance. He'd found her. Despite everything, despite all her precautions and prayers, he'd found her. Jonah stepped off the porch and walked toward Rourke with that distinctive limp, and even from inside, Eliza could hear the cold edge in his voice. "This is private property. State your business or move along." Rourke's laugh carried across the yard, familiar and sickening. "Well now, that's not very friendly. I'm just looking for someone, a woman, thin, brown hair, probably going by the name Eliza Hartwell. Ring any bells?" "Can't say it does." "Really? Because I heard in town that Jonah Reed recently hired a woman matching that description. Funny coincidence, don't you think?" "What's your interest in this woman?" "She's my fiancée. Ran away from home after a family tragedy. been sick with grief, not thinking clearly. I've been searching for her for months, and I'd very much like to take her back where she belongs." It was such a smooth lie, delivered with such convincing concern that anyone who didn't know better would believe it. But Eliza knew better. She knew exactly what Caleb Rourke was capable of. "Even if I did know this woman," Jonah said, his voice flat, "what makes you think she'd want to go anywhere with you?" "Because she's not well, friend. Grief does terrible things to people. Makes them imagine things that aren't true, believe things that didn't happen. She needs someone to take care of her, help her heal." Rourke dismounted, moving closer to Jonah with predatory ease. "So why don't you just send her out here and we can all go about our business peacefully?" "And if I don't?" The temperature in the yard seemed to drop. "Then I'd have to assume you're holding her against her will, maybe even taking advantage of a vulnerable woman. Sheriff might be interested in hearing about that." Eliza's hands clenched into fists. He was threatening Jonah, threatening to destroy everything she'd found here, and it was all her fault. She should have told Jonah the truth from the beginning. She should have been honest about the danger instead of hoping it would never catch up to her. She had to fix this. She had to protect Jonah and Maggie the way they'd protected her. Before she could talk herself out of it, Eliza unlocked the door and stepped out onto the porch. Both men turned to look at her, and she saw Rourke's face split into a smile that made her stomach turn. "There she is. Eliza, darling, I've been so worried." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Eliza said, proud that her voice only trembled slightly. "You're not my fiancé. You're a murderer, and if there's any justice in this world, you'll hang for what you did to my family." Rourke's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. "Still telling that story, are you?" "The fire was an accident, Eliza. Everyone knows that. You're confused, traumatized. You need help." "The fire was no accident. You locked my parents and brother in the barn and set it ablaze because we testified against your brother. I saw you do it." "Did you?" Rourke took a step forward, and Jonah immediately moved to block his path. "Or did you imagine it? You were quite hysterical that night, from what I heard. Grief can make people see things that aren't there." "I know what I saw. And I know that no court will ever believe the word of a traumatized woman over a respected member of the community." Rourke's smile widened. "Face it, Eliza. You have no proof, no witnesses, nothing but your own confused memories. You can keep running, or you can come with me now and get the help you so clearly need." "She's not going anywhere with you," Jonah said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made even Rourke pause. "You're not welcome on my land. Leave now, or I'll make you leave." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." But Jonah's hand moved to rest on the gun at his hip, a revolver Eliza had noticed but never seen him touch before. "You've got 10 seconds to get back on that horse and ride out of here." Rourke's expression finally cracked, revealing the violence beneath the veneer of civility. "You're making a mistake, friend. I'll be back with the law, and when I do, then you'll have the chance to repeat your lies to the sheriff and see if he believes you any more than I do. But tonight, right now, you're leaving my property. 10, 9, 8. For a moment, Eliza thought Rourke would refuse, would draw his own weapon and turn this confrontation into bloodshed. But then he saw something in Jonah's face, perhaps the willingness to follow through on his threat, perhaps the cold calculation of a man who'd killed before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again, and took a step back toward his horse. "This isn't over," Rourke said, swinging back into the saddle. "I'll be back, Eliza. Count on it." "If you come back," Jonah said conversationally, "I'll shoot you for trespassing. Fair warning." Rourke stared at them both for a long moment, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Then he wheeled his horse and rode off into the darkness, disappearing down the long drive toward the main road. The silence he left behind was deafening. Eliza's legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the porch steps, her whole body shaking with delayed shock. Jonah stood in the yard for another minute, watching the darkness as if expecting Rourke to return, then finally turned and walked back to where Eliza sat. "Inside," he said. "We need to talk." She followed him into the kitchen on numb legs, watched as he checked every window and door, ensuring they were locked. When he finally sat down across from her, his expression was unreadable. "Tell me everything," he said, "and I mean everything. No more secrets." So Eliza told him about her father testifying against Rourke's brother in a land dispute that had turned violent. about the threats that followed, about coming home to find her family's barn ablaze and seeing Caleb Rourke riding away in the distance, about how the authorities ruled it an accident because Rourke had friends in high places, and Eliza had no proof beyond her own testimony, about how she'd fled west to escape him, had used every penny she had to buy a new identity as a mail-order bride, had thought she was finally safe. When she finished, Jonah sat quietly for a long moment, his jaw working. "And you didn't think to mention that a murderer might come looking for you when I offered you a job?" "I thought I was safe," Eliza said, tears streaming down her face. "The newspapers reported that the entire family died in the fire. I thought he believed I was dead. I never imagined I would never have stayed if I thought I was putting you and Maggie in danger. Too late now." But his voice wasn't angry, just tired. "He knows you're here. He'll come back, probably with the law, trying to get you arrested for something or declared incompetent or some other legal maneuvering. And if that doesn't work, he'll try something else," Eliza finished. "Something more direct. Jonah, I'll leave tonight. I'll go right now, lead him away from here. Don't be stupid. You'd be dead within a day." Jonah stood and began pacing, his limp more pronounced with stress. "No, we need to be smart about this. First thing tomorrow, I'm riding into town to talk to the sheriff, explain the situation. If Rourke tries anything official, at least we'll have our side of the story on record first. The sheriff won't believe me any more than the law in Pennsylvania did. Maybe not, but he'll believe me." Jonah stopped pacing and looked at her directly. "I wasn't just any soldier during the war, Eliza. I was an officer. I commanded men, and after the war I served as a territorial marshal for 3 years before I bought this ranch. Sheriff Brennan knows me. He knows I don't lie and I don't tolerate criminals. If I tell him Rourke threatened you, he'll listen." Hope, fragile and painful, bloomed in Eliza's chest. "You'd do that? Put yourself on the line for me? You're part of this household now. That makes you my responsibility." He said it matter-of-factly, as if it was obvious, as if 3 weeks was enough time to create that kind of loyalty. "Besides, Maggie would never forgive me if I let anything happen to you, and frankly, neither would I." Before Eliza could respond, a small voice came from the stairs. "Papa?" They both turned to see Maggie standing there in her nightgown, the bandage white against her dark hair, her face pale and frightened. "I heard shouting. What's wrong?" Jonah crossed to his daughter and scooped her up gently, mindful of her injury. "Nothing you need to worry about, little bird. Just some business with a confused man. How's your head?" "Hurts." Maggie looked over her father's shoulder at Eliza. "Miss Eliza, why are you crying?" Eliza wiped hastily at her face. "Just worried about you, sweetheart. You gave us quite a scare today." "I'm sorry I fell." Maggie's lower lip trembled. "I was being careless." "Accidents happen," Jonah said firmly. "No one's angry at you. Now, let's get you back to bed before you make that head wound worse by staying up too late." As Jonah carried Maggie upstairs, Eliza heard the girl say, "Papa, is Miss Eliza going to stay? Or is she leaving like the other lady did?" "She's staying," Jonah said with conviction. "She's not going anywhere." Eliza sat alone in the kitchen, surrounded by locked doors and the memory of Caleb Rourke's threats, and wondered if Jonah was right. Could she stay? Could she build a life here despite the danger, despite the past that refused to let her go? She didn't know. But for Maggie's sake, for Jonah's sake, for her own sake, she had to try. The alternative was running forever, and she was so tired of running. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, and somewhere in the darkness, Eliza knew that Caleb Rourke was planning his next move. The confrontation wasn't over. It had only just begun. But for the first time since her family died, Eliza wasn't facing danger alone. She had Jonah's steady strength and Maggie's innocent trust in a home worth fighting for. It would have to be enough. It had to be. Because tomorrow the real battle would begin, and Eliza Hartwell was done running from her past. It was time, finally, to stand and fight. Dawn came too quickly and not quickly enough. Eliza had spent the night in a chair beside Maggie's bed, watching the child's chest rise and fall with each breath, alert for any sign of the complications the doctor had warned about. Jonah had checked on them twice during the long hours, appearing silently in the doorway like a ghost before disappearing again to patrol the house and grounds, his rifle always within reach. When the first gray light began to seep through the window, Eliza heard Jonah moving downstairs, preparing for the ride into town. She slipped quietly out of Maggie's room and found him in the kitchen, already dressed and armed, checking his revolver with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. "She slept through the night," Eliza said softly. "No fever, no confusion. I think she's going to be all right." "Good." Jonah holstered the gun and reached for his coat. "Abel will be here within the hour. Sam, too. I've told them both to stay close to the house until I get back. Don't let anyone in except people you know and trust." "How long will you be gone?" "However long it takes to make Sheriff Brennan understand that Caleb Rourke is a threat." Jonah paused, his hand on the door, and looked back at her with an expression that was almost gentle. "Eliza, if something happens, if Rourke comes back while I'm gone, you take Maggie and you run. Don't try to be brave. Don't try to fight. Just run." "I won't leave her," Eliza said, and realized as she spoke that she meant it absolutely. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, Maggie had become hers to protect, hers to love, and she would die before she let Rourke hurt that child. "If he comes back, I'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe." Jonah studied her for a long moment, seeing something in her face that seemed to satisfy him. "I know you will. That's what worries me." He crossed to where she stood and did something unexpected. He took her hand and squeezed it briefly, a gesture of solidarity and something else she couldn't quite name. "I'll be back by nightfall. Stay safe." Then he was gone, the sound of his horse's hooves fading into the cold morning, leaving Eliza alone with a sleeping child and the weight of responsibility she'd never asked for, but somehow couldn't bear to put down. The morning passed in tense quiet. Maggie woke hungry and cranky, which the doctor had said was a good sign, and demanded that Eliza finish the story about Princess Adeline and Ember, the dragon. So Eliza sat beside her bed and read, keeping one ear tuned to the sounds outside. The movements of Abel and Sam as they worked closer to the house than usual. The distant calls of birds and wind through the eaves. They were on the final chapter when Maggie suddenly grabbed Eliza's hand, her small face serious. "Miss Eliza, are you scared?" There was no point in lying to a child who'd already seen too much. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm scared." "Of the bad man who came last night?" "Yes." "Why does he want to hurt you?" Eliza closed the book carefully, buying time to find the right words. "Because I saw him do something terrible, and he's afraid I'll tell people the truth about what he did." "You should tell," Maggie said with the absolute certainty of a child. "If someone does something bad, you're supposed to tell. That's what Papa always says." "Your Papa is right. And I am telling. He's telling the sheriff right now, but sometimes, even when you tell the truth, people don't believe you." Maggie frowned, processing this. "That's not fair." "No," Eliza agreed. It's not fair at all." "Is that why you're sad all the time? Because people didn't believe you?" The question hit harder than expected. "I'm sad because the bad man hurt people I loved, my family. They died because of what he did." "Like my mama died." Maggie said it matter-of-factly, but her grip on Eliza's hand tightened. "Papa says Mama would want me to be happy, even though she's gone. Do you think your family would want you to be happy too?" Eliza's vision blurred with sudden tears. Out of the mouths of children came wisdom that adults spent years trying to understand. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I think they would." "Then you should try," Maggie said earnestly. "To be happy, I mean. Because you're nice and you read stories really good, and I like you being here, and it would be sad if you were sad forever." Eliza pulled the child into a careful hug, mindful of her bandaged head, and let herself cry quietly against Maggie's small shoulder. This girl, this brave, brilliant little girl who'd lost her mother and nearly died herself just yesterday, was somehow trying to comfort the broken adult who was supposed to be caring for her. "I'll try," Eliza promised. "I'll try to be happy, for you and for them." "Good." Maggie settled back against her pillows with satisfaction. "Now finish the story. I want to know if Princess Adeline figures out how to help Ember breathe fire again." So Eliza read the final chapter, her voice still thick with emotion, and they discovered together that the dragon had never really lost her fire. She'd only forgotten she had it, buried it deep inside out of fear of hurting someone she loved. And Princess Adeline's gift wasn't teaching the dragon to breathe fire again, but reminding her that fire wasn't just destruction. It was also warmth, light, protection, the courage to defend what mattered. When Eliza closed the book on the final page, Maggie sighed with deep contentment. I knew she'd remember. The fire was always there, just hiding. Yes, Eliza said softly, just hiding. The afternoon wore on with agonizing slowness. Abel brought up lunch on a tray, his weathered face creased with concern, and reported that there'd been no sign of trouble. Sam was watching the road, and Jonah had left instructions that if anyone unfamiliar approached, they were to fire a warning shot and send someone for the sheriff immediately. Eliza tried to eat, but couldn't manage more than a few bites. Her stomach was twisted with anxiety, her mind conjuring 100 terrible scenarios. What if the sheriff didn't believe Jonah? What if Rourke had already convinced the law that Eliza was the criminal, the liar, the one who needed to be arrested? What if Jonah never came back? You're worrying, Maggie observed from her bed, where she was supposed to be resting but was actually drawing pictures on a slate. Your face gets all scrunched up when you worry. Sorry, I'm trying not to. Papa will be okay. He's really good at talking to people when he wants to be. And he's really good at the other thing too, if talking doesn't work. What other thing? Fighting. Maggie said it casually, as if discussing the weather. He doesn't do it much anymore because of his leg, but Sam told me Papa was the scariest soldier in his whole unit during the war. Said he could take down 3 men before they even knew what hit them. Eliza didn't know whether to be comforted or more worried by this information. Your Papa is full of surprises. That's what Mrs. Henderson says, too. Maggie set down her slate and yawned. Can I sleep for a little bit? My head hurts. Of course, sweetheart. Eliza helped her lie down properly and pulled the quilt up to her chin. I'll be right here if you need me. She watched Maggie drift off, then moved to the window to stare out at the ranch. Everything looked peaceful, the barn, the corrals, the distant shapes of cattle grazing in the winter pasture. But Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, some storm gathering just beyond the horizon. The feeling proved prophetic. She was still at the window when she saw the smoke. At first she thought it was just someone burning brush, a normal part of ranch work. But then she realized it was coming from the barn, thick black smoke billowing up into the clear sky, and her blood turned to ice. Fire. The barn was on fire. Eliza ran from the room, her heart hammering, and nearly collided with Abel at the bottom of the stairs. The barn! I know, Sam's already there with buckets, but it's spreading fast. Abel's face was streaked with soot. Must have been smoldering in the hay. It wasn't an accident, Eliza said with absolute certainty. It's Rourke. He's here. Abel's expression hardened. Stay in the house, lock the doors. I need to help Sam, or we'll lose everything. But lock the doors! Abel was already running back outside, and through the window Eliza could see flames licking up the barn walls, could hear the panicked screaming of horses trapped inside. The horses. They'd burn alive if someone didn't get them out. Eliza knew she should stay with Maggie, should lock the doors and hide and wait for Jonah to come home. That's what he'd told her to do. That's what any sensible person would do. But she could hear the horses screaming, and she could see Abel and Sam fighting a losing battle against flames that were spreading too fast to be natural, and she knew with sick certainty that Rourke had set this fire deliberately, had probably soaked the hay in oil or kerosene to make sure it would burn hot and fast and consume everything. Just like he'd burned her family's barn, just like he'd burned her parents and brother alive. The rage that swept through Eliza was white-hot and cleansing, burning away the fear that had controlled her for so long. She'd run from Caleb Rourke once. She'd let him destroy everything she loved once. She'd lived with the guilt and the grief and the crushing weight of survival for months. Not again. Not here. Not in this place that had given her back the will to live. Eliza ran upstairs, her mind clear and sharp with purpose. Maggie, she said, shaking the child awake as gently as she could. Maggie, wake up. We need to move you. What's happening? Maggie's eyes were unfocused, confused. There's a fire in the barn. I need to get you somewhere safe. Eliza wrapped the quilt around the child and lifted her, surprised by her own strength, by the adrenaline singing through her veins. "Can you hold on tight to me?" "I'm scared," Maggie whimpered. "I know, sweetheart, I know, but I'm going to keep you safe. I promise." She carried Maggie down the stairs and into Jonah's bedroom, the one room she'd never entered, never even peeked into. It was sparse and masculine, with a large bed and a trunk at its foot, but most importantly, it had a heavy door and a window that faced away from the barn. Eliza set Maggie on the bed and grabbed a chair, wedging it under the door handle. "Listen to me very carefully. You stay in this room. You don't open the door for anyone except me or your papa. Not Abel, not Sam, not anyone. Do you understand?" "Where are you going?" Tears were streaming down Maggie's face. "To help with the fire. To save the horses. To stop Caleb Rourke from taking anything else from her." "Don't go! Please don't go!" Maggie was sobbing now, reaching for her. "Everyone always leaves and doesn't come back." Eliza's heart cracked, but she couldn't stop. Not now. She took Maggie's face in her hands and looked directly into those gray eyes that had haunted her from the first moment they met. "I'm coming back. Do you hear me? I'm coming back. And so is your papa, and we're going to be fine. But right now I need you to be brave. Can you be brave for me?" Maggie hiccuped, nodded. "Good girl. Stay here. Stay quiet. And if you hear anything that scares you, you hide under that bed and you don't come out until you hear your papa's voice. Promise me." "I promise," Maggie whispered. Eliza kissed her forehead, then did something she'd never done before. She grabbed Jonah's rifle from where it leaned against the wall and checked that it was loaded. She'd learned to shoot as a girl, though she'd never been particularly good at it. But she didn't need to be good. She just needed to be willing. Outside, the fire was a roaring beast now, consuming the barn with terrifying speed. The horses had fallen silent, either freed or dead, Eliza couldn't tell. Abel and Sam were still fighting the flames, but they were losing, driven back by heat and smoke, their faces black with soot and desperation. Eliza scanned the yard, looking for Rourke, knowing he had to be here somewhere. He wouldn't set a fire and leave. He'd want to watch, want to enjoy the destruction, want to be here when she came running out in panic so he could finish what he'd started in Pennsylvania. There. In the shadow of the storage shed, a figure on horseback, watching the chaos with satisfaction. Eliza raised the rifle, her hand steadier than she'd expected, and fired a shot into the air. The crack of the gun cut through the roar of flames, and Rourke's head snapped toward her. Even at this distance, she could see his smile. He dismounted and started walking toward the house with the casual confidence of someone who'd already won. "Eliza, there you are. I was worried you'd gotten trapped inside. What a terrible accident this fire is, so tragic, so preventable." "Stay back." Eliza's voice was strong, commanding. "I'm armed, and I will shoot you." "Will you?" Rourke kept coming, kept smiling. "I don't think you have it in you. You're not a killer, Eliza. You're a scared little girl who watched her family die and has been running ever since." "I'm done running." She aimed the rifle at his chest, her finger on the trigger. "This ends here, Rourke, one way or another." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. He stopped about 20 yards away, reassessing. "You shoot me, you'll hang for murder. Is that what you want? To die for the sake of some rancher and his brat?" "They're not just some rancher and his brat. They're my family now, and I won't let you take them from me the way you took my parents and brother." "Your family?" Rourke laughed, the sound ugly and mocking. "You've been here 3 weeks and you think you're part of a family? You're hired help, Eliza. You're a servant. The moment you become inconvenient, Reed will throw you out just like everyone else has." That's not true. But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Was it true? Was she just fooling herself, pretending she belonged here when she was really just another obligation, another burden? "Isn't it? You let his daughter get hurt. You brought danger to his door. How long do you think before he realizes you're more trouble than you're worth?" Rourke took another step forward. "Put down the gun, Eliza. Come with me quietly, and I'll make sure the fire doesn't spread to the house. I'll let the girl and the rancher live. But if you make this difficult—" "If I make this difficult, what? You'll burn them alive too?" The rage was back, burning hotter than the flames consuming the barn. "You're a coward, Rourke. You kill from a distance. You set fires and lock doors and destroy innocent people because you can't face them directly. Well, here I am, facing you directly. So what are you going to do now?" Rourke's pleasant mask finally fell away completely, revealing the monster beneath. His hand moved toward the gun at his hip, and Eliza saw her death in his eyes, saw the same cold calculation that had preceded her family's murder. She pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, the sound deafening. The shot went wide. She'd known it would. Her aim was terrible, but it was close enough that Rourke threw himself to the side, cursing. He drew his own gun, faster than she'd expected, and fired back. Pain exploded through Eliza's left arm, white-hot and overwhelming. She staggered, but didn't fall, didn't drop the rifle, didn't stop moving. She had to get to cover, had to reload, had to keep Rourke away from the house where Maggie was hiding. She dove behind the water trough as another shot rang out, splintering the wood above her head. Her arm was bleeding badly, soaking through her sleeve, but she forced herself to focus. One shot left in the rifle. She had to make it count. "You're only making this worse," Rourke shouted from somewhere to her right. "I didn't want to kill you, Eliza. I just wanted you to keep quiet. But now you've forced my hand." Another shot, and water began pouring from a hole in the trough. Eliza risked a glance around the edge and saw Rourke advancing, saw Abel running toward them from the barn with a pitchfork in his hands, saw Sam right behind him. Rourke saw them too. He turned and fired twice in quick succession, and both men went down. Eliza couldn't tell if they were dead or just wounded, couldn't afford to think about it because Rourke was turning back toward her, reloading as he walked. She had one shot. She was bleeding and scared, and her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the rifle steady. But she thought about her parents, about Thomas, about the life Rourke had stolen from her. She thought about Maggie hiding in Jonah's room, terrified and alone. She thought about Jonah trusting her to keep his daughter safe. She thought about the dragon who'd forgotten how to breathe fire, and the princess who'd reminded her that fire wasn't just destruction, it was protection, courage, the willingness to defend what mattered. Eliza stood up from behind the trough, exposed and vulnerable, and aimed the rifle with both hands despite the agony in her left arm. Rourke's eyes widened in surprise, and for just a moment fear flickered across his face. "For my family," Eliza said quietly. "And for mine." She fired. This time, her aim was true. Rourke jerked backward, clutching his shoulder, his gun falling from his hand. He staggered, tried to reach for the weapon, but Eliza was already moving forward, the empty rifle raised like a club. "Don't," she said. "Don't move." Rourke looked up at her, blood seeping between his fingers, and laughed, a wet, pained sound. "You got lucky. One shot. But next time, there won't be a next time." The voice came from behind Eliza, and she turned to see Jonah riding into the yard at full gallop, Sheriff Brennan and two deputies right behind him. Jonah's face was a mask of fury and fear as he took in the burning barn, the bodies of Abel and Sam on the ground, Eliza bleeding and barely standing. He was off his horse before it fully stopped, his rifle trained on Rourke with the steadiness of someone who'd done this before. "Don't move. Don't breathe. Don't give me a reason." "Reed, wait." Sheriff Brennan dismounted more slowly, his hand on his own gun. "What the hell happened here?" "That man set fire to my barn and shot my ranch hands and tried to kill Eliza," Jonah said, his voice deadly calm. "I told you he was dangerous. I told you he'd come back." "She shot me," Rourke protested. "I came here peacefully to retrieve my fiancée, and she attacked me." "Shut up," Jonah said conversationally. "Sheriff, you'll find oil-soaked rags in the saddlebags of his horse over there, evidence of arson. And if you check with the telegraph office in town, you'll find records of inquiries he made yesterday about the Reed Ranch's location." This was premeditated. Sheriff Brennan looked between Jonah, Eliza, and Rourke, his weathered face troubled. Then he sighed and gestured to his deputies. "Take him into custody. Charge him with arson, attempted murder, and assault. We'll sort the rest out at the jail." As the deputies hauled Rourke to his feet, he fixed Eliza with a look of pure hatred. "This isn't over. You hear me? It's not over." "Yes," Eliza said quietly. "It is." Then her legs gave out, and the world tilted sideways, darkness rushing in to claim her. The last thing she heard before unconsciousness took her was Jonah's voice, rough with emotion. I've got you. I've got you. You're safe now. And somewhere in the gathering dark, Eliza finally let herself believe it might be true. When Eliza woke, it was dark, and she was in her bed, and her arm hurt with a deep throbbing ache that made her gasp. A lamp burned low on the bedside table, and in the chair beside her bed sat Jonah, his head bowed, his hands clasped together as if in prayer or exhaustion or both. Jonah? Her voice came out as a croak. His head snapped up, and relief flooded his features. You're awake. Think everything. You're awake. He reached for a glass of water on the table and helped her drink, his hands gentle. How do you feel? Like I got shot. You did get shot. Clean through the arm, thankfully. Missed the bone. Doctor says you'll heal fine if you rest and don't do anything stupid for the next few weeks. Maggie is fine. Scared half to death, but fine. She's asleep in her room. I only got her to bed an hour ago. She refused to leave your side until she saw you wake up at least once. Jonah set the glass down and rubbed his face tiredly. Eliza, what you did today? What were you thinking? I was thinking I wasn't going to let him hurt anyone else I care about, she said simply. Jonah was quiet for a long moment. You could have died. If I'd been even 5 minutes later, but you weren't. You came back just like you promised. Barely. Rourke had been in town spreading lies all morning, trying to convince people you were mentally unfit, dangerous. It took me 3 hours to convince Sheriff Brennan to come out here with me. 3 hours. His voice was rough with self-recrimination. In that time, he burned my barn, shot Abel and Sam. They'll live. Sam took a bullet in the leg, Abel in the shoulder. They're both at the doctor's now, ornery and complaining, which means they're going to be fine. Jonah leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking more exhausted than Eliza had ever seen him. But you reckless, brave, foolish woman, you stood up to a murderer with one bullet and a lot of determination, and you almost got yourself killed in the process. I had to protect Maggie. I know, that's the only reason I'm not furious with you. He reached out and took her uninjured hand in his. The sheriff arrested Rourke, with the physical evidence of arson, your testimony, my testimony, and Abel and Sam's accounts. He'll hang for what he did here. And I sent a telegram to the authorities in Pennsylvania explaining the whole situation. They're reopening the investigation into your family's deaths. It's going to take time, but you're free, Eliza. He can't hurt you anymore. The words should have brought relief, joy, triumph. Instead, Eliza felt suddenly, overwhelmingly tired. It doesn't bring them back. No, Jonah agreed softly. It doesn't. Nothing will. But it means they didn't die for nothing. It means justice, finally. Justice. Eliza tested the word, found it strange and bitter on her tongue. I spent so long wanting justice, Jonah. And now that I have it, I just feel empty. That's normal. Grief doesn't end just because the person who caused it is punished. Jonah squeezed her hand gently. But maybe now you can start to heal properly, without fear, without looking over your shoulder. Maybe. The word felt fragile, uncertain, but for the first time in months, Eliza thought it might actually be possible. What happens now? She asked. Jonah was quiet, and when he spoke, his voice was careful, neutral. Well, the barn is mostly gone. We'll have to rebuild, and you need to recover, which means you'll be on light duty for a while. And Maggie will probably drive you insane fussing over you every second of every day. He paused. Unless you want to leave. If you want to go back east, start over somewhere else without all these memories, I'd understand. You've more than earned your freedom. Leave. The word should have felt like possibility, like opportunity. Instead, it felt like loss. Do you want me to leave? Eliza asked quietly. Jonah looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. No, he said simply. No, I don't want you to leave. Maggie doesn't want you to leave. Even the horses would probably protest if you left. But the question is, do you want to stay? After everything that's happened here, all the danger and the chaos and the... Yes, Eliza interrupted. Yes, I want to stay. Even though I can only offer you room and board and $5 a month? Even though you'll be stuck out here in the middle of nowhere with a grumpy rancher and his talkative daughter? Especially because of that. Eliza smiled despite the pain in her arm, despite the exhaustion weighing down her bones. This is the first place I've felt like I belonged since my family died. The first place that felt like home. So yes, Jonah Reed, I want to stay. If you'll have me. Something in Jonah's face transformed, the stern line softening, years of grief and loneliness momentarily lifting. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture that was formal and old-fashioned and somehow perfect. Then stay, he said. Stay as long as you want. Stay forever, if that suits you. Forever. It was a terrifying word, a beautiful word, a word Eliza had thought she'd lost the right to use when her family died. But sitting here in this room, her hand in Jonah's, with Maggie sleeping safely down the hall and justice finally within reach, forever didn't seem quite so impossible anymore. Forever sounds good, she whispered. Jonah smiled, a real smile, rare and precious, and Eliza thought about dragons who'd forgotten their fire and princesses brave enough to remind them. She thought about how sometimes the family you chose was just as real as the family you were born into. She thought about how maybe, just maybe, she'd found the place where she was meant to be all along. Outside, dawn was breaking over the ranch, painting the snow gold and pink. The barn was gone, but they would rebuild. Rourke was captured, but the memories would take longer to heal. Nothing was perfect. Nothing was simple. But for the first time in months, Eliza felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. Real, solid, sustaining hope. And it was enough. 2 days after the fire, Eliza woke to find Maggie curled up at the foot of her bed like a faithful dog, her small hand resting protectively on Eliza's ankle. The sight made her chest ache with a tenderness so fierce it was almost painful. "Maggie," she whispered. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here?" The girl stirred, her eyes blinking open slowly. The bandage on her head was smaller now, the doctor having changed it the day before and pronounced her healing well. "Making sure you don't disappear," Maggie said with perfect seriousness. "Everyone I love disappears. Mama disappeared. The last lady who worked here disappeared. I'm not letting you disappear too." Eliza's throat closed with emotion. She reached out with her good arm and pulled Maggie close, pressing a kiss to her dark hair. "I'm not going anywhere. I promised you, remember?" "People promise lots of things," Maggie said against her shoulder, her voice small and uncertain. "But sometimes they can't keep their promises, even when they want to." It was wisdom far too old for such a young soul, learned through losses no child should have to endure. Eliza held her tighter, wishing she could shield Maggie from every hurt the world might throw at her, knowing she couldn't but determined to try anyway. "You're right," Eliza said softly. "Sometimes people can't keep their promises, even when they desperately want to. But I'm making you a different promise now. I promise that I will do everything in my power to stay. I promise that if I ever have to leave, it will be because there's no other choice, and I will fight with everything I have to come back to you. And I promise that as long as I'm here, you are loved, completely and absolutely loved. Can you accept that promise?" Maggie was quiet for a long moment, her face pressed against Eliza's nightgown. Then she nodded. "Okay, I accept." They stayed like that until Jonah's voice drifted up from downstairs, calling that breakfast was ready, and if they didn't come down soon, he was going to eat Maggie's portion himself. The threat was hollow, they both knew it, but it made Maggie giggle and scramble off the bed, pausing only to help Eliza sit up carefully, mindful of her injured arm. The doctor had bound it tightly, and the pain had faded to a dull throb that was manageable as long as Eliza didn't try to lift anything or move too quickly. She dressed awkwardly with Maggie's assistance, the girl taking her responsibilities as a nurse with endearing seriousness. Downstairs, they found Jonah at the stove, somehow managing to flip eggs without burning them despite his obvious lack of enthusiasm for cooking. He looked up when they entered, and relief flashed across his face before he masked it with a slight smile. "Look who's finally up. I was beginning to think you'd decided to spend the rest of winter in bed." "Don't tempt me," Eliza said, settling carefully into a chair. "How are Abel and Sam?" "Complaining loudly, which the doctor says is a good sign. Sam's wife has taken over his care and is apparently driving him insane with her fussing. Abel's staying at the boarding house in town until he can ride properly again." Jonah slid eggs onto plates and set them on the table. "I visited them both yesterday. They asked after you. I should go see them when I'm stronger. Thank them for everything. They'd like that. Jonah sat down across from her, his expression growing serious. I also stopped by the sheriff's office. Rourke's been officially charged with arson, attempted murder, and assault. The evidence is solid. Sheriff Brennan says there's no question he'll hang. Maggie looked up from her eggs, her eyes wide. The bad man is going to die? Jonah hesitated, clearly weighing how much truth to share with his daughter. The bad man is going to face justice for the terrible things he did. And yes, that probably means he'll die. Good, Maggie said with startling vehemence. He hurt Miss Eliza and Abel and Sam and our barn, and he was mean, and I'm glad he's going to die. Maggie, Jonah started. It's all right, Eliza interrupted softly. She understood Maggie's anger, understood the need for a child to believe that bad people were punished and good people were protected. Even if the world didn't always work that way, even if sometimes the innocent suffered and the guilty went free, at least in this case, justice would prevail. The bad man can't hurt anyone anymore. That's what matters. They ate in contemplative silence for a few minutes before Maggie suddenly brightened. Papa, since Miss Eliza is hurt and can't do heavy work, can she teach me things instead? Like how to read better and how to sew and how to make bread like she does? Jonah raised an eyebrow at Eliza. If Miss Eliza is up to it, I don't see why not. Though I suspect her idea of rest and your idea of keeping her resting are two different things. I'll be gentle, Maggie promised. I'll make her sit down the whole time and I'll bring her tea and everything. Then it sounds like you have a new teacher, Jonah said. Lucky you. Lucky me, Maggie agreed happily, and launched into an enthusiastic list of everything she wanted to learn, from embroidery to pie making to the proper way to address a letter. Eliza listened with amusement and growing warmth, feeling something settle into place inside her chest. This simple domestic morning, this easy conversation, this sense of belonging, this was what she'd been searching for when she'd boarded that train west. Not romance or adventure or escape, but simply a place where she mattered, where her presence made a difference, where she was valued for who she was rather than who she was expected to be. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm, slower and gentler than before, but no less purposeful. Eliza's arm healed gradually, the wound closing cleanly under the doctor's watchful care. She spent her mornings teaching Maggie, who proved to be a bright and eager student with an endless capacity for questions. They practiced reading and writing, working through Maggie's school books, and the small collection of novels Eliza had brought from Pennsylvania. They baked bread and mended clothes, Eliza demonstrating techniques with one hand, while Maggie tried to replicate them with varying degrees of success. Jonah worked on rebuilding the barn, a task made harder by his injury, but one he approached with stubborn determination. He accepted help from neighbors who arrived without being asked. Men and women from surrounding ranches who understood that in this harsh land, survival depended on community. They brought timber and tools and labor, and slowly, board by board, a new barn began to rise from the ashes of the old one. In the evenings, they gathered by the fire, and Eliza read aloud while Jonah carved small wooden figures for Maggie, and Maggie drew pictures of the stories they were hearing. It was peaceful in a way Eliza had never experienced, a quiet contentment that asked nothing of her except presence. But beneath the peace, Eliza felt something stirring, some question that needed asking even though she feared the answer. She told Jonah she wanted to stay, and he told her to stay forever. But what exactly did that mean? Was she to remain the hired help indefinitely, forever in this liminal space between servant and family? Would there come a day when Maggie was older and didn't need a caretaker, when Jonah found a proper wife who could give him more children, when Eliza would have to pack her carpet bag and leave to make room for the real family he deserved? The questions haunted her during sleepless nights, whispered doubts that no amount of daytime contentment could completely silence. 3 weeks after the fire, on a clear cold morning when frost painted the windows in delicate patterns, Eliza found her answer in the most unexpected way. She was in the kitchen kneading bread dough one-handed. She'd developed a technique that worked despite her still healing arm, when Jonah came in from outside, stamping snow from his boots. He hung up his coat and hat, then stood there watching her work with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. Do I have flour on my face? Probably, Jonah said, but he didn't smile. Eliza, can we talk? Her heart plummeted. This was it. He was going to tell her she had to leave, that he'd found someone else, that her usefulness had expired. She set down the dough with trembling hands and wiped them on her apron, preparing herself for the blow. Of course, what is it? Jonah pulled out a chair and sat heavily, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain. I've been thinking about what happens next, about the future. All right, Eliza said carefully, not sitting, not trusting her legs to hold her if he said what she feared he was going to say. When Rebecca died, I thought that was it for me. Thought I'd just raise Maggie on my own and never let anyone close again because losing her had hurt so badly I couldn't imagine surviving that kind of loss twice. He stared at his hands, work-worn and scarred. And for 2 years, that worked fine. I had Maggie, I had the ranch, I had a purpose. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it was enough. Jonah, let me finish, please. He looked up at her, and his eyes were dark with emotion. Then you showed up, half frozen on a train platform, and Maggie asked you to read her a story, and somehow in the space of a few weeks, you became essential. Not just to Maggie, but to me, to this place. You brought life back into this house, Eliza. You made it feel like a home again instead of just a place where we existed. Eliza's hands clenched in her apron, hope and fear warring in her chest. And then Rourke came, and you almost died protecting Maggie, and I realized something. Jonah stood and crossed to where she stood frozen by the counter. I realized that I was falling in love with you, and it scared me half to death because I'd promised myself I'd never risk that kind of pain again. But the thing about love is you don't get to choose when it happens. It just happens, whether you're ready or not. You, what? Eliza's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. I'm in love with you, Eliza Hartwell. He said it simply, without flourish, as if he was stating a fact as obvious as the sunrise. I'm in love with your strength and your kindness and the way you read stories to my daughter. I'm in love with how you make breakfast sing and how you've never once complained about the isolation or the hardship. I'm in love with your courage and your laughter and the way you fought a murderer with one bullet because you refused to let him take anything else from you. Tears were streaming down Eliza's face now, and she couldn't have stopped them if she tried. Jonah, I'm not, if you don't feel the same way, that's fine. He said it quickly, as if afraid she'd interrupt. You can stay here as long as you want, and nothing has to change. But if there's any chance that you might feel something similar, then I need you to know that I'm not offering you a job anymore. I'm offering you a life. A real life, as my wife, as Maggie's mother in truth, instead of just in practice. I'm offering you forever, Eliza, not as an obligation, but as a choice freely made. The kitchen was silent except for the crackle of the fire and Eliza's ragged breathing. She stared at Jonah, this strong, broken, beautiful man who'd given her shelter when she had nothing, who'd protected her when danger came, who'd somehow seen past her grief and damage to the person she was trying to become. I'm not whole, she said finally, her voice shaking. I'm still broken from losing my family. I still have nightmares. I still cry sometimes for no reason. I'm not the woman you married before, Jonah. I'm not asking you to be Rebecca, Jonah interrupted gently. And I'm not whole either. I've got a bad leg and worse memories and a daughter who's going to need more patience than any one person should be expected to have. We're both broken, Eliza. But maybe that's exactly why we fit. Maybe two broken people can hold each other up better than two whole ones ever could. I love you, Eliza whispered, the truth spilling out before she could stop it. I've been trying not to, trying to keep distance, trying to remember this was just a job. But I love you, Jonah. I love you and Maggie and this ranch and this life. I love it so much it terrifies me because I can't lose it. I can't lose you. I can't survive losing anyone else I love. Then don't lose us. Jonah stepped closer, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the old scars on his hands, the new hope in his eyes. Stay. Marry me. Marry. Not because you need security or because I need help with Maggie, but because we choose each other. Because when you add up all the broken pieces of two damaged people, Sometimes you get something that's stronger than either one could have been alone. Yes, Eliza said, the word bursting out of her like something that had been trapped too long. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it, the life, the choice, the forever. Yes. Jonah's face transformed, years of grief and loneliness falling away to reveal joy so pure it was almost painful to witness. He cupped her face in his work-roughened hands and kissed her, gentle and careful and absolutely certain. Eliza kissed him back, tasting salt from her own tears and feeling something inside her chest crack open, not breaking but blooming, like ice thawing after a long winter. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and slightly stunned, a small voice came from the doorway. Does this mean Miss Eliza is staying forever for real? They turned to find Maggie standing there in her nightgown, her hair wild from sleep, her face lit with such hope that it made Eliza's heart ache. It means, Jonah said, holding out his arms so Maggie could run into their embrace, that Miss Eliza is going to become your mama, if that's all right with you. All right? Maggie threw her arms around both of them, squeezing with surprising strength. It's perfect. It's the most perfect thing ever. Can we tell everyone? Can we tell Abel and Sam and Mrs. Henderson? And we can tell whoever you want, Eliza laughed, holding this child who'd somehow become hers tighter than was probably strictly necessary. We can shout it from the rooftops if you'd like. Yes, let's do that. Maggie pulled back, her face flushed with excitement. When's the wedding? Can I help plan it? Can I wear a fancy dress? Will I get to call you Mama instead of Miss Eliza? Slow down, Jonah said, but he was grinning. One question at a time. They spent the rest of the morning planning, Maggie's enthusiasm infectious as she described the wedding she wanted to see. Small and simple, just family and close friends, but perfect in its own way. Eliza listened and agreed and felt pieces of herself that had been frozen for so long finally beginning to thaw. This was healing, she realized. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of joy strong enough to coexist with it. Not forgetting the people she'd lost, but making room in her heart for the people she'd found. Not running from her past, but choosing her future. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, on a clear spring morning when the last of the winter snow was finally melting and the first brave flowers were pushing through the thawed earth. They gathered in the ranch's new barn, rebuilt stronger than before, a testament to what could rise from ashes, with Abel and Sam as witnesses, Sheriff Brennan and his wife in attendance, and half the town of Silver Creek crowded in to see the mail-order bride, who'd been rejected, marry the war hero rancher after all. Maggie stood beside Eliza in a dress Mrs. Henderson had made special, holding a bouquet of early wildflowers and beaming with pride. Jonah wore his best suit, which had seen better days but had been brushed and pressed until it looked almost new. And Eliza wore a simple blue dress that she'd sewn herself during her recovery, nothing fancy but made with care and hope. The ceremony was brief. The minister from Silver Creek spoke about love and commitment and the courage it took to choose happiness after loss. Jonah and Eliza exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises to stand together through hardship, to choose each other every day, to build a life that honored both their pasts and their future. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jonah kissed Eliza with a sweetness that made several of the women in attendance sigh audibly. And when he pulled back, he looked down at Maggie and said, "Your mama and I have something for you." Maggie's eyes went wide. "A present?" "Better." Eliza knelt carefully. Her arm was healed now, but still occasionally stiff, and took Maggie's hands in hers. "Your papa and I have been talking, and we want to make something official. We want to adopt you. Legally, formally, completely. So that you're not just your papa's daughter anymore, but our daughter, mine and his together. What do you think?" For a moment, Maggie just stared at them both, her mouth slightly open in shock. Then her face crumpled and she launched herself at Eliza, sobbing into her shoulder with the force of emotions too big for words. "Is that a yes?" Jonah asked gently, kneeling beside them. "Yes," Maggie wailed. "Yes, yes, yes, I want to be yours. I want to be really, truly your daughter." "Then you are," Eliza whispered, holding her tight. "You already were, in our hearts. Now, it'll just be on paper, too." The rest of the day passed in a blur of celebration. There was food, tables laden with dishes brought by neighbors, more food than 3 people could eat in a week. There was music. Abel had brought his fiddle despite his still healing shoulder, and he played while people danced in the barn's open space. There was laughter and toasts and stories shared, the community gathering around this new family to welcome them and wish them well. As the sun began to set, painting the Nevada sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Eliza found herself standing at the edge of the celebration, watching Jonah dance with Maggie, both of them laughing as they spun in circles. She thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, sitting on that frozen train platform ready to give up. She thought about her parents and Thomas, about the family she'd lost and the grief that would always be part of her. But she also thought about the family she'd found, about the life she'd chosen, about the future that stretched before her bright with possibility. "You look happy." Sheriff Brennan appeared beside her, a cup of punch in his weathered hand. "Real happy. Not just polite happy." "I am," Eliza said, surprised by how true it was. "I really am." "Good. You've earned it." He took a sip of his punch, then added casually, "Got word from Pennsylvania last week. The authorities there reopened the investigation into your family's deaths based on Rourke's confession here. Found evidence he'd been paid by his brother to start that fire. Brother's been arrested too. Whole thing's finally going to trial properly." Eliza's breath caught. "They believe me? After all this time, they finally believe me?" "Never should have doubted you in the first place," Brennan said gruffly. "But yes, they believe you. Justice is slow sometimes, but it gets there eventually. Your parents and brother, they'll get justice now. Proper justice." Tears pricked Eliza's eyes, but they were different from the tears she'd cried for so many months. These were tears of relief, of vindication, of finally being seen and heard and believed. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for telling me." "Just doing my job." Brennan tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Eliza alone with her thoughts and her tears and her gratitude. She stood there until Jonah found her, sweeping her into his arms without a word. "What's wrong?" he asked, seeing her tears. "Nothing's wrong," Eliza said, smiling through the tears. "Everything's finally right." That night, after the guests had gone and Maggie had finally been convinced to go to bed, despite her protests that she was too excited to sleep, Eliza and Jonah sat together on the porch in the cool spring darkness. Jonah's arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, both of them wrapped in a quilt against the evening chill. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Eliza asked softly. "When you found me on the train platform with Maggie? I remember thinking you looked like a ghost, like someone who'd already died but forgot to lie down." Jonah's voice was quiet in the darkness. "And I remember being angry that Henry Barlow had been stupid enough to reject you, because even then I could see you were something special. I thought you were going to turn me away too, send me back to town, tell me I was someone else's problem." "I almost did," Jonah admitted. "I'd spent 2 years keeping everyone at arm's length, and taking you in meant risk. Meant letting someone new into our lives who might leave, might get hurt, might die like Rebecca did. But then I looked at Maggie's face when she talked about you, and I couldn't do it. Couldn't send you away when my daughter had finally found something that made her smile again." "I'm glad you didn't." Eliza tilted her head to look up at him, seeing his profile silhouetted against the stars. "I'm glad Maggie asked me to read her a story. I'm glad you offered me a job. I'm glad I was too stubborn or too broken or too something to get back on that train and leave." "So am I." Jonah pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You know what Maggie said to me this morning? She said, 'Papa, I think Mama, I think she was supposed to get rejected by that mean Mr. Barlow, because if she hadn't, she wouldn't have found us, and we wouldn't have found her, and we'd all still be sad and lonely. She's 7 years old, and she already understands things it took me 40 years to learn." "What things?" "That sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads directly to the best thing. That rejection and loss and pain, they're not the end of the story. They're just the middle, the hard part you have to get through to reach the good part." He tightened his arm around her. "You getting rejected brought you to us. Me losing Rebecca made me someone who could understand your grief. Maggie losing her mother meant she needed you as much as you needed her. All these terrible things, and they led us here. To this." Eliza was quiet, turning his words over in her mind. She thought about the fire that had killed her family, the long journey west, the rejection and despair and danger. She thought about how many times she'd wanted to give up, to stop fighting, to just let the grief consume her entirely. And she thought about Maggie asking for a story, about Jonah offering her a job, about slowly learning to live again instead of just surviving, about finding family in the last place she'd expected to look. "Do you think they would have liked you?" she asked suddenly. "My parents and Thomas? Do you think they would have approved of all this?" Jonah considered the question seriously. "I think," he said finally, "that they loved you and wanted you to be happy. And I think if they could see you now, married to a rancher with a bum leg, raising a daughter who's not yours by blood, but is absolutely yours by choice, living in the middle of nowhere and making bread by hand, I think they'd be proud of the life you've built. I think they'd want this for you." "I hope so," Eliza whispered. "I hope they know I haven't forgotten them, even though I'm happy again. I hope they understand that loving you and Maggie doesn't mean I love them any less." Love doesn't divide, Eliza. It multiplies. You can love us and still love them. You can be happy here and still grieve for what you lost. Both things can be true at the same time. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the soft lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through new grass, the distant call of an owl hunting. Finally, Eliza said, "Will you do something for me?" "Anything. Tell me how you imagine our life will be. 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Tell me the future you see." Jonah was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he began to speak, his voice low and certain in the darkness. 5 years from now, Maggie will be 12 and already arguing with me about whether she's old enough to ride into town alone. The barn will be full of horses she's helped train, and she'll have read every book in the house at least twice because her mama taught her to love stories. The ranch will be doing well, not rich, but stable, comfortable. We'll have added on to the house maybe another room or two for the family we're building. Family? Eliza's breath caught. If you want. If we're blessed that way. A brother or sister for Maggie. Maybe more than one. His hand moved to rest gently on her stomach. But only if you want that. There's no expectation, no pressure. You're enough, just as you are. "I want that," Eliza said softly. "I want to fill this house with life and laughter and love. I want to give Maggie siblings. I want to build a family so strong that nothing can break it." "Then that's what we'll do." Jonah continued painting their future with words. 10 years from now, Maggie will be 17 and getting ready to make her own choices about her life. Maybe she'll want to stay and help run the ranch, or maybe she'll want something different, teaching or medicine, or something we haven't even imagined yet. We'll support her either way, and our younger children will be running wild, driving you crazy with their questions and their energy, and this house will be full of noise and chaos and so much love it spills out the windows. "And us?" Eliza asked. "What about us?" "Us?" Jonah pulled her closer. "We'll be right here, maybe a little grayer, definitely more tired, but still choosing each other every single day, still reading stories by the fire, still working side by side to keep this place running, still finding reasons to laugh despite the hardships, still building the life we started today." Eliza closed her eyes, letting herself see it. The future Jonah described, solid and real and possible, children playing in the yard, Maggie grown into a confident young woman, the ranch thriving, a life built not on running from the past but on choosing the future, day by day, moment by moment. "That sounds perfect," she whispered. "It won't always be easy," Jonah warned. "There'll be hard times, droughts, bad winters, sickness, loss. Life doesn't stop throwing challenges just because you're happy." "I know, but we'll face them together. That's what makes the difference." They sat on the porch until the cold drove them inside, then climbed the stairs to the room they would now share, passing Maggie's door and hearing the soft sound of her breathing. Tomorrow, their new life would truly begin. The work of building a family, running a ranch, creating a home. Tomorrow, there would be challenges and responsibilities and all the ordinary difficulties of existence. But tonight, Eliza lay in Jonah's arms in the darkness and felt something she'd thought was lost forever: peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of something stronger. Not forgetting the past, but making room for the future. Not running from grief, but learning to carry it alongside joy. She thought about the mail-order bride who'd been rejected, the woman who'd nearly frozen to death on a train platform, the broken soul who'd thought she had nothing left to live for. And she thought about the girl on that platform who'd asked a simple question that changed everything. "Can you read me a story?" In a way, that's exactly what had happened. Eliza had read Maggie a story, and in return, Maggie and Jonah had given her a new story to live. Not one written by fate or obligation or desperation, but one chosen freely, built deliberately, created through courage and love, and the willingness to try again despite past heartbreak. "Thank you," Eliza whispered into the darkness, not sure if she was speaking to Jonah beside her, to Maggie sleeping down the hall, to her lost family watching from wherever they were, or to some larger force that had guided her here despite everything. Jonah's arms tightened around her. For what? For giving me a reason to keep breathing, for showing me that life after loss is possible, for loving me even though I came to you broken. "You weren't broken," Jonah said softly. "You were surviving the only way you knew how. There's a difference. And I didn't give you a reason to keep breathing. You found that yourself. I just gave you a safe place to remember how." Maybe he was right. Maybe she'd had the strength inside her all along, hidden beneath the grief and fear, waiting for the right moment to remember her own fire. Like Ember, the dragon in Maggie's story. The fire had always been there, just forgotten, just waiting for someone to remind her it existed. And maybe that's what family was, not people who completed you or fixed you or made you whole, but people who reminded you that you'd always had everything you needed inside yourself. People who stood beside you while you remembered how to be brave, how to love, how to live. Eliza drifted towards sleep with Jonah's heartbeat steady beneath her ear and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to navigate together. The past would always be part of her, the fire, the loss, the grief, the fear. But it wouldn't define her anymore. What would define her now was the choice she'd made, the family she'd found, the life she was building one day at a time in the Nevada wilderness, with a man who understood loss and a child who'd taught her how to hope again. Outside, the first light of dawn was beginning to paint the eastern sky. A new day was coming, and with it, all the promise and possibility of the future they'd chosen together. Eliza smiled in the darkness and let sleep finally claim her, knowing that when she woke, she wouldn't be alone. She'd never have to be alone again. And somewhere in the house, on a small shelf in Maggie's room, sat a worn book about a princess and a dragon, its pages soft from reading, its story complete. But the real story, the one being written in daily choices and small kindnesses and love freely given, that story was just beginning. And it was, Eliza thought, as she finally surrendered to sleep, the best story she'd ever been part of. The end.